Chapter 1500. The Sagemaster's status was transcendent, and he always had a sage-like demeanor. At this moment, he was truly enraged, and his emotions were quite agitated. One could imagine how much of a psychological impact the news of the burial of heaven and the secrets of Qinshin's tomb had on him. Emperor Chu Yun waved his hand at him, indicating for him to calm down. Then, the emperor revealed a meaningful sneer and slowly explained, "That's right. It's precisely because Ji Tianxing possesses the burial of heaven that I indulged his arrogance and personally went to see him. I even allowed him to head to the Clear Sky Pagoda. The burial of heaven is not only a peerless divine weapon, but also the key to Qinshin's tomb. It's truly the world's #1 divine weapon. I'm not the only one who wants it. All the emperors of the various empires and the top powers of each country covet it. Even the 3 divine masters want to obtain the burial of heaven and uncover the secrets of Qinshin's tomb. After all, Qinshin is the #1 genius since ancient times, and his martial arts talent is unprecedented. All the powerhouses in the world, including the 3 divine masters, worship and respect him greatly. Most importantly, Qinshin is the only one who has ascended in the past 30,000 years. He's the only one who has the method to ascend." After hearing Emperor Chu Yun's words, the Sagemaster nodded in agreement and said with some excitement, "That's right. Ever since the end of the Great War of the Gods, this world has been sealed by the gods. The continents are not connected to each other, and even martial gods are unable to ascend. The world is shrouded in invisible shackles. Only Qinshin from 1,000 years ago managed to break through the shackles and ascend to the higher realms. He then became the God King who ruled the heavens. He's the pride of our Xinwu continent, and he's also the person who brought hope to the entire continent. If we obtain the burial of heaven, we can find Qinshin's tomb and obtain Qinshin's inheritance, as well as the method to ascend to the higher realms. Saint Emperor, you know better than this old man how important the sword of burial of heaven is. Why did you let Ji Tianxing leave with the divine sword?" The smile on Great Emperor Chu Yun's face became more and more playful as he said in a low voice, "That's right. I've always dreamed of obtaining the sword of burial of heaven, but now was definitely not the time." The ranking battle of the god disciples that day had caused a sensation in the entire imperial city. Ji Tianxing had become famous after the battle and was now being targeted by various superpowers. It's easy for me to kill him and seize the sword of burial of heaven, but who can guarantee that the news won't leak out? If someone were to recognize the sword of burial of heaven, wouldn't everyone know that the sword of burial of heaven was in his possession? Moreover, once I obtain the sword of burial of heaven and open Qinshin's tomb, there will definitely be a heavenly anomaly. At that time, the 6 great empires would be in an uproar, and this matter would spread throughout the world. The empires and countless experts would crazily fight for the sword of burial of heaven and find Qinshin's tomb at all costs. The Chuyan Empire and I would be in an extremely dangerous situation. Hearing this, the sage sovereign had already guessed his thoughts. He nodded silently and said, "That's right. The sword of burial of heaven contains Qinshin's inheritance and the secret of ascension. It's enough to make everyone go crazy." Great Emperor Chu Yun's expression became more and more solemn as he said in a low voice, "For hundreds of years, the 6 great empires have been fighting both openly and secretly, trying to annex and eliminate each other. Our Chu Yun Empire's strength is only ranked 5th among the 6 great empires. Our foundation is very weak. Once the other 5 great empires know that the sword of burial of heaven is in my possession, they will definitely do everything they can to fight for it and seize it. At that time, how can we resist the 5 great empires who are like wolves and tigers? I'm afraid that we won't be able to protect the sword of burial of heaven at all. Even the entire Chuyan Empire will be destroyed in the flames of war. Therefore we must not be hasty." The sage sovereign finally understood and nodded. "I see. The sage sovereign is indeed far-sighted. This old man understands now. Although the sword of burial of heaven is a peerless divine weapon and contains enormous secrets, it's also a hot potato, a fatal poisonous blade. No matter who obtains the sword of burial of heaven, they will become the target of public criticism and be besieged by various countries' powerhouses and various major forces. The sage sovereign allowing Ji Tianxing to go to the vast heaven pagoda is to divert the disaster away, so as to not implicate our Chu Yin Empire. You also made this old man release the news of the sword of burial of heaven, wanting the 5 great empires to make a move to snatch it one after another and fight each other for the sword of burial of heaven. At that time, you can reap the benefits and truly obtain the sword of burial of heaven. Only after the sage sovereign finished speaking did great Emperor Chu Yin nod his head slightly, revealing a hint of a sinister sneer. That's right. A wise person must plan well before taking action, and also have to be far-sighted and predict the future. A month has passed. Presently, Ji Tianxing should have arrived at the vast heaven pagoda. The news of the sword of burial of heaven has also been released. This emperor believes that after the 5 great empires receive the news, they will quickly rush to the vast heaven pagoda and try to snatch the sword of burial of heaven. However, no matter who obtains the sword of burial of heaven in the end, they will be besieged from all sides, and even bring about the destruction of their countries. We only need to sit on the mountain and watch the tigers fight. As he spoke, great Emperor Chu Yun's eyes flickered with a cold light, and he sneered sinisterly. When the 5 great empires are fighting each other to the death, in order to snatch the sword of burial of heaven, it will be the best time for this emperor to make a move. At that time, not only will this emperor obtain the sword of burial of heaven, but I will also unify the 6 great empires and become the #1 great emperor under the divine master. The sage sovereign is wise. With such a grand strategy, you will definitely achieve your wish. The sage sovereign hurriedly bowed and flattered sincerely. However, after he finished speaking, he frowned and thought for a while. He still asked worriedly, "Sage sovereign, could that brat Ji Tianxing have already found Qinshin's tomb? If he didn't obtain Qinshin's inheritance, how could he be so monstrous?" Great Emperor Chu Yin shook his head and said confidently, "Qinshin is the #1 god since ancient times. How could his tomb be found by an ordinary person? With that brat Ji Tianxing's strength and knowledge, it's impossible for him to find Qinshin's tomb. Moreover, he actually took out the sword of burial of heaven in front of hundreds of thousands of people in the arena. This means that he doesn't know the secret of the sword of burial of heaven and Qinshin's tomb. This damned fool doesn't understand what the sword of burial of heaven means at all. Such an ignorant person actually obtained the sword of burial of heaven. The heavens are truly blind." The sage sovereign was also filled with indignation. He nodded in agreement and said, "That's right. How glorious was Qinshin when he was alive. Not only was he worshipped by hundreds of millions of martial artists, but he also suppressed 3 martial gods with 1 sword. He was truly unparalleled and heroic. I didn't expect that today, 1,000 years later, Qinshin's sword would actually fall into the hands of a foolish brat. It's truly a pity that a bright pearl is covered in dust." The corner of great Emperor Chu Yun's mouth twitched, and he revealed a confident and domineering sneer. He said in a low and forceful voice, "The sword of burial of heaven will belong to me one day. The territories and people of the other 5 empires will also submit to me." The sage sovereign looked at him with a determined gaze and said solemnly, "I will do my best to assist the sage sovereign and unify the 6 empires. Chapter 1501. The peak of Mount God Bestowment was as peaceful as ever. The clear sky pagoda gathered the spiritual energy of heaven and earth from millions of miles away, making the peak as beautiful as a fairyland. In a short 5 days, the young geniuses from the various empires arrived one after another under the guidance of the divine envoys and stayed in the various palaces. The dozen or so young geniuses from the Chu Yin Empire had been cultivating in the Chu Yin Palace and rarely showed themselves. During this period, Lin Daoi also did not come to the Chu Yin Palace. Ji Tianxing cultivated in the secret chamber for 5 days, and his strength improved imperceptibly. Unfortunately, he still could not fully comprehend the 6th sword imparted by the burial of heaven. The 9 swords of the burial of heaven were incomparably mysterious. Only those who had reached the deity realm could fully grasp it and unleash its greatest power. With Ji Tianxing's strength, it was already not easy for him to master the first 5 swords. As for the sixth sword, he would probably have to wait until he reached the peak of the primordial spirit realm before he could comprehend and grasp it. Early in the morning, Ji Tianxing was meditating in the secret chamber. Suddenly, a maid's clear voice sounded from outside the secret chamber. She reported, "Young Master Ji, Divine Envoy Lin Daoyi has come to visit. Please come quickly to meet him." Ji Tianxing, who was in the middle of cultivation, was immediately awakened by the maid's voice. He quickly ended his cultivation and opened his eyes. He muttered to himself, "Lin Daoyi actually came to find me alone? I came to the Clear Sky Pagoda as the #1 genius of the Chuyin Empire. Logically speaking, I should receive the best treatment and resources. Could it be that he came for this matter?" Ji Tianxing silently analyzed and felt that it was very possible. After all, he had been in the Clear Sky Pagoda for several days, but had not received any resources or rewards. He got up and walked out of the secret chamber with a trace of anticipation. A maid was guarding the door of the secret chamber. When she saw him come out, she hurriedly bowed. "Young Master Ji, please follow this servant." Then, the maid led him through the corridor and the living room, and into the elegant study. When they reached the door of the study, the maid stopped and stood guard outside. Ji Tianxing stepped into the study and saw Lin Daoyi standing by the window, silently looking at the clouds outside. "Ji Tianxing greets Divine Envoy Lin." Ji Tianxing cupped his hands and greeted Lin Daoyi. He then asked, "I wonder why Divine Envoy Lin has come to find me?" Hearing this, Lin Daoyi turned around and looked at him with bright eyes, revealing a kind smile. "Ji Tianxing, I naturally have something important to discuss with you. Follow me to a place. Someone wants to see you." Ji Tianxing frowned and asked in confusion, "May I ask who wants to see me?" Lin Daoyi smiled and shook his head. "You don't have to ask. Follow me and you will know." Seeing how mysterious he was, Ji Tianxing was even more puzzled. But he didn't ask any more questions. He followed Lin Daoyi out of the study and left Chuyin Palace. The two of them passed through the plaza outside the palace and walked towards the Clear Sky Pagoda in the distance. After a while, the two of them walked to the bottom of the Clear Sky Pagoda and stopped outside a dignified and sacred palace. This palace was very exquisite and beautiful. It was more imposing and dignified than the other palaces. It was also the palace closest to the Clear Sky Pagoda. Outside the wide gate, which was 10 feet tall, there were 99 white jade steps. There were 200 guards wearing golden armor standing guard. 2 huge statues stood on both sides of the gate. One was a divine dragon, and the other was a qilin. Ji Tianxing could vaguely guess that the people who lived in this palace were either divine envoys of the Clear Sky Pagoda, or protectors with a higher status than divine envoys. Lin Daoyi brought him to the palace gate and stopped. He smiled and said, "Ji Tianxing, I can only bring you here. You can go in by yourself." Ji Tianxing nodded his head at him and was about to stride into the great hall. Lin Daoyi hesitated for a bit, then transmitted his voice and exhorted, "You have to remember, be more respectful to that little lord. You absolutely can't offend her." Ji Tianxing's footsteps paused for a bit, feeling increasingly puzzled in his heart. But he did not ask any more. He lifted his foot and stepped into the great hall. It was only to see that inside the spacious great hall with a radius of 1,000 feet, it was a scene of splendor and splendor. The ground was paved with enormous golden bricks. There were a total of 18 pillars on both sides of the great hall. They were all vermilion with gold and carved with dragons and phoenixes. On the walls around the great hall, there were all kinds of mountains and rivers, scenes of the sun, moon, and stars, as well as some mysterious and ancient relief sculptures. The dome was inlaid with hundreds of millions of gemstones, akin to a vast sea of stars, emitting a bright brilliance, illuminating the entire great hall down to the finest detail. Ji Tianxing crossed the great hall and walked towards the north. There was a 90-foot-tall platform there, on which was a spacious throne. On the left and right sides of the throne, there were 2 valiant female guards in silver armor, each holding a dark golden halberd in their hands, looking majestic and awe-inspiring. And that spacious and luxurious gilded throne was like a crescent moon. The design was very exquisite and gorgeous, exuding a sacred and noble aura. When Ji Tianqing saw this throne clearly, he felt that it was somewhat familiar, and a strange look flashed across his eyes. This throne, seems like I've seen it somewhere before. This thought popped up in his mind, and he fixed his eyes on the throne. He saw that on the spacious and luxurious throne, there was a petite and adorable figure lying on it. That's right. She was lying on her stomach, not sitting down. That was a petite little girl who was about 1 meter tall. She wore a fiery red long dress, had a head full of light golden hair, and wore exquisite and adorable headdresses. Her mouth and nose were petite and adorable, but her eyes were large and clear. Her delicate little face was filled with excitement and anticipation, as red as an apple. At this very moment, she was lying on the throne, staring fixedly at a black name list, looking exceptionally focused. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing instantly raised his eyebrows and revealed a gentle smile. Jiao, I didn't expect that. It's actually you. Without a doubt, that petite and adorable blonde little girl was the Jiao whom he had met once before. Jiao, who was concentrating on reading, was instantly startled awake by his voice. She hurriedly raised her head and turned her head to look at Ji Tianqing. When she saw Ji Tianqing's appearance clearly, she rolled and climbed up. Her little face revealed an extremely brilliant smile, and said with a heart full of surprise, Tianqing, it's really you. When I saw your name just now, I was still thinking whether or not it could be a coincidence. I didn't expect that you really came. Hee, you really didn't disappoint me. Not only did you participate in the God-disciple selection, you even came to the Clear Sky Pagoda as the #1 genius of the Chu Yin Empire. This is really too unbelievable. Hearing what she said, Ji Tianqing understood that the black booklet that she was flipping through was most likely the name list of the God-disciple selection candidates. His gaze fell on the black booklet, and a thought suddenly appeared in his mind. Chapter 1502. Jiao was filled with excitement. Her face was flushed red as she stared at Ji Tianqing with sparkling eyes. Others might not know, but she knew very well that Ji Tianqing was not from Shenwu continent. Moreover, 10 months ago, Ji Tianqing had not reached the primordial spirit realm. Now he had reached the 5th level of the primordial spirit realm. Even with Jiao's status and knowledge, she could not understand such a miracle. She was extremely shocked. At this moment, Ji Tianqing deliberated for a moment. He looked at Jiao with a solemn expression and said calmly, Jiao, I believe you know that you are my only friend here. Jiao nodded hurriedly and said with a smile, Yes, of course. Ji Tianqing continued, I came to the vast divine kingdom to participate in the God-disciple selection, not to become a God-disciple. Jiao was stunned. The smile on her face disappeared. She frowned in confusion. She stared at Ji Tianqing with her big clear eyes and asked, Tianqing, why did you participate in the God-disciple selection? Ji Tianqing did not evade and said directly, I came to the Clear Sky Pagoda to find someone who is more important to me than my life. Jiao blinked her big round eyes and vaguely understood something. Ji Tianqing looked at her sincerely and asked, Jiao, can you help me check if there is a woman called Yunyao here? Jiao revealed an as expected expression and asked with a smile, Tianqing, is the person you are looking for your lover? She is not my lover. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said solemnly, She is my wife. Oh, Jiao dragged her voice. She had an as expected expression. She hurriedly held the black name list and flipped through it quickly. Ji Tianqing stared at her with burning eyes. His heart was filled with anticipation and a trace of nervousness. If Yunyao was in the vast heaven pagoda, that would be great news. If Yunyao was not here, then all his previous efforts would be in vain, and the only glimmer of hope would be extinguished. How could he not be nervous in this situation? 100 breaths later, Jiao finished flipping through the name list. She raised her head to look at Ji Tianqing and shook her head regretfully. Tianqing, this is the list of the 6 nations' geniuses, but there is no one called Yunyao on it. This news was like a bolt from the blue to Ji Tianqing. His body shook and his face stiffened. His burning eyes quickly dimmed and were filled with disappointment. Fortunately, he was mentally prepared, so he was able to withstand this blow. He pursed his lips in silence and did not lose his composure. Jiujiu looked at him with concern. She could empathize with his disappointment and sadness. She thought for a moment and quickly consoled him. Tianxing, don't be disheartened. This is only the list of the 6 nations' geniuses. Other than these 100 young geniuses, there are also many maids in the vast heaven pagoda. Let me help you check. Ji Tianxing was silent for a moment before shaking his head. Jiujiu, thank you, but there's no need. She came to the Shenwu continent 2 months earlier than me, and is also a martial arts genius with outstanding talent. She definitely won't become a maid. Jiujiu understood and nodded. Since you are sure that Yin Yao will become a god disciple of some divine nation, then she is definitely not in the vast heaven pagoda. In fact, she is most likely not in the vast heaven pagoda. Ji Tianxing suppressed the disappointment in his heart and pulled himself together. His expression returned to normal as he said with a firm tone, "No matter where she is, I will definitely find her. Jiujiu, I'm sorry. I'm afraid that we will have to say goodbye as soon as we meet. Yun Yao is not in the vast heaven pagoda, so there is no need for me to stay here and waste time." Jiujiu was shocked and asked with a frown, "Tianxing, are you in a hurry to find her now?" Ji Tianxing did not speak, but he nodded with a firm expression. Jiujiu quickly waved her small hand and persuaded, "Tianxing, I'm afraid that won't do. Don't be impatient and listen to my explanation. Yun Yao is not here, so she is most likely in the Heaven In Divine Nation or the Luoshui Divine Nation. The god-disciple selection in those 2 divine nations has already ended. Even if you leave the vast heaven pagoda now, you will definitely not be able to make it in time. Moreover, the 3 divine nations are extremely vast. If you search aimlessly, how long will it take?" Hearing this, Ji Tianxing fell silent. He frowned and said nothing. Jiujiu continued, "Tianxing, it's not that I look down on you, but the continent is too vast and dangerous. With your current strength, it's impossible for you to cross the Shenwu continent, let alone enter the sacred grounds of those 2 divine nations. In addition, every divine nation has its corresponding divine laws, and the vast heaven pagoda also has its own rules. The god-disciple candidates who come here must abide by the rules of the vast heaven pagoda. How can anyone come and go as they please? Tianxing, this is the law of the divine nations. No matter how anxious you are, it's useless." Jiujiu's analysis was clear and logical. Logically and emotionally, it was impossible for Ji Tianxing to leave the vast heaven pagoda right now. He deliberated for a moment before asking, "Jiujiu, when can I leave?" Jiujiu looked at him with a solemn expression and said solemnly, "If you are strong enough and can stand out among the geniuses of the 6 nations, you can pass the assessment in half a year and become a god disciple. At that time, the vast heaven pagoda will select the 5 most outstanding powerhouses among the god disciples. These 5 god disciples will represent the vast heaven divine nation and participate in the exchange of the 3 divine nations. At that time, you can leave the vast heaven pagoda and exchange pointers with the god disciples of the other 2 divine nations." At this point, Jiujiu smiled and comforted him. If Yin Yao's talent is outstanding, and she can also become one of the top 5 god disciples, then you will be able to see her with your own eyes. Even if you can't see her, you can still communicate with the god disciples of the other 2 divine nations and ask them about your wife's whereabouts. Therefore, Tianxing, you don't have to be anxious. Wait patiently for half a year, then you will know the results." "I see." Ji Tianxing nodded, and the worry and anxiety in his heart dissipated. He had made up his mind to cultivate diligently and work hard to improve his strength. He would strive to become one of the top 5 god disciples in half a year. Jiujiu saw that he had calmed down and felt much more relaxed. She reminded him again, "Tianxing, although you are the number 1 genius of the Chuyin Empire, the Chuyin Empire is ranked last among the 6 nations. There are many young geniuses in the other 5 empires who are at a higher realm than you, and they will be your strong opponents. In the next half a year, you must work hard to improve your strength. You must not slack off. Otherwise, if you can't become one of the top 5 god disciples, how are you going to find her?" After she finished speaking, she waved her hand and shot out a ray of light. She sent the black register to Ji Tianxing. "Tianxing, This register is for you. It records the information of all the candidates. Chapter 1503. Ji Tianxing took the black roster and kept it in his interspatial ring. He looked at Jiao and said calmly, Jiao, thank you. However, I would like to know why you are helping me. Jiao gave him a radiant smile and explained, you also said that I'm your only friend here. If I don't help you, who else can? Besides, I have my own plans and motives for helping you. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows. What motives? Of course I can't say. Jiao shook her head and said with a chuckle, don't worry. I definitely won't do you any harm. Ji Tianxing looked at her deeply. Seeing her innocent look in her clear and bright eyes, he didn't ask any more questions. In that case, thank you very much. Farewell. He cupped his hands at Jiao and left the hall. Not long after, he returned to his room in Qian Palace. He entered the secret chamber and took out the black roster. He sat down and read it carefully. There were more than 100 names recorded on the roster. They were the young geniuses from the 6 empires. Everyone's name, age, strength realm, and background were recorded on the roster. It was clear at a glance. Ji Tianxing quietly flipped through the book for an hour. He finished reading all the contents of the book and memorized a lot of important information. Among the 100 young geniuses, the weakest was at the 2nd level of the Essence Soul Realm. Most of them were between the 3rd and 5th level of the Essence Soul Realm. 14 of them were at the 5th level of the Essence Soul Realm like him. In addition, there were 3 people whose strength exceeded his and attracted his attention. The 3 names were recorded in red. Clearly, they were highly valued by the Clear Sky Pagoda. They would definitely be heavily groomed in the future. One of them was called Song Jianyu. He was a graceful and elegant young master. According to the roster, he was the #1 young genius of the White Knight Empire. He was also a noble prince, and the 7th son of the White Knight Holy Emperor. He had cultivated martial arts for 48 years, and had reached the 6th level of the Essence Soul Realm. He was famous in the White Knight Empire, and was revered and worshipped by hundreds of millions of young warriors. The second genius was called Jiang Ningxue. She was a gentle and graceful beauty. This woman was the #1 genius of the Thousand Snow Empire. She was born in an ancient aristocratic family. It was said that her bloodline was quite noble. However, her identity and background were not recorded in detail. Only her important information was written on the register. She had cultivated in the martial Tao for 46 years, and now possessed strength at the 6th Firmament Essence Soul Realm. Before participating in the ranking battle, she was almost unknown to the world, and kept a low profile. It wasn't until the ranking war that she defeated the 2 strongest geniuses of the Thousand Snow Empire in public, and became the #1 genius in one fell swoop. As far as Ji Tianxing was concerned, both Song Jianyu and Jiang Ningxue were formidable opponents. However, what he truly valued was the 3rd genius. His name was Qin Songxiong, and he was from the strongest country among the 6 nations, the Blue Dragon Empire. Qin Songxiong had cultivated martial arts for 40 years, and had reached the peak of the 6th Firmament Essence Soul Realm. He could break through to the 7th Firmament Essence Soul Realm at any time. Plus, this person was cold, arrogant and overbearing. He was a proud heaven's favorite. He held the firmament blade in his hand, and carried the 1,000 drunks pot all year round. He was dressed in a carefree and unrestrained manner. He used 36 moves of the firmament blade technique, and his prestige in the Blue Dragon Empire was unparalleled. In Ji Tianxing's opinion, the 3 of them were all extremely talented geniuses. Among them, Qin Songxiong's skills were the most profound, and the most mysterious and unpredictable. He had a premonition that Qin Songxiong would be his strongest opponent. Although in the assessment half a year later, as long as I become the top 5 god disciples, I will be able to participate in the exchange of the 3 holy kingdoms. However, who would be willing to be 2nd place? Who wouldn't want to be #1 and become the most dazzling god disciple in the vast holy kingdom? Ji Tianxing murmured softly. His fighting spirit and fighting spirit were surging in his heart. When the time came, he would definitely defeat the 3 geniuses and become #1. After a long time, he kept the register and kept it in his heart. He continued to cultivate. 2 days later in the morning, when the sun rose, Lin Daoi suddenly came to Qian Palace and ordered for the 15 geniuses to gather. The geniuses who were cultivating in seclusion walked out of their rooms and gathered in the main hall of Qian Palace. Everyone had cultivated in seclusion for a few days. When they met again, they realized that their strength and aura had increased imperceptibly. Seeing that everyone was present, Lin Daoi announced in a dignified voice, "You have been in the Clear Sky Pagoda for 7 days. Today, I have gathered you to participate in the worship ceremony." When they heard about the worship ceremony, more than 10 young geniuses were interested. Some of them were puzzled and interested. Some of them seemed to know about the worship ceremony and looked expectant. Lin Daoi introduced in a solemn tone, "This is the rule of the Clear Sky Pagoda. Every God-disciple candidate who comes to the Clear Sky Pagoda has to worship the great divine master vast holy kingdom. When the time comes, you must maintain a solemn and respectful attitude. Only then can you be baptized by the divine master's radiance. If anyone dares to be rude and offends the dignity of the divine master, not only will they not be baptized, they will also be severely punished." Everyone was an outstanding martial genius. Of course, they understood the importance and sacredness of this matter. No one dared to offend the dignity of the divine master vast holy kingdom. Seeing that everyone understood, Lin Daoi nodded his head in satisfaction and led everyone out of Qian Palace. Under Lin Daoi's lead, everyone crossed the wide square and walked toward the divine palace near the Clear Sky Pagoda. When they crossed the square, they saw groups of young experts walking out of the surrounding palaces. Those were the young geniuses of the various empires. They were all led by a divine envoy and were rushing toward the divine palace. This was the first time that Ji Tianxing, Wuxia, and the others had seen the young geniuses of the other empires. Although everyone did not show any expression, they were secretly sizing up the geniuses of the other empires and discussing secretly. Wuxia followed behind Ji Tianxing and sized up the groups with a deep gaze. Suddenly, a strange look flashed past his eyes. He transmitted his voice to Ji Tianxing. "Young Master Ji, look at the group on the left. They are walking out of the White Knight Palace. They should be the geniuses of the White Knight Empire." The black-robed youth behind the divine envoy seems to be the #1 genius of the White Knight Empire. That person's strength is not bad. He has actually reached the 6th degree realm. Ji Tianxing glanced at the black-robed youth and found that he was indeed a handsome and elegant young master. He transmitted his voice to Yin Wuk. "That is Song Zhanyu. He is one of the strongest geniuses among the candidates for the God-disciple selection. However, he is not the strongest. The group on the right is from the Thousand Snow Empire. The leader is a girl in a white dress. Her name is Jiang Ningxue, and she is not any weaker than Song Zhanyu. In the group in front, there is a youth in gray linen clothes and black cloth shoes. He is holding a wine jug in his hand. He is the strongest." Chapter 1504. As Yin Wuk listened to Ji Tianxing's words, he sized up Song Zhanyu, Jiang Ningxue, and Qin Sangxiong. He memorized their appearances and Ji Tianxing's words. Then, he asked Ji Tianxing with a confused expression, "Young Master Ji, how do you know these people? And you know them so clearly?" Ji Tianxing calmly replied, "It's a secret." Yin Wuk became even more curious and guessed, "Could it be that you didn't cultivate in seclusion these past few days, and instead went to the various palaces to gather information?" After saying this, he also felt that it was unlikely. He shook his head and said, "That's impossible. You don't look like someone who would do such a thing." "It's good that you know," Ji Tianxing nonchalantly replied. Yin Wuk became even more confused. He frowned and pondered for a moment. Suddenly, a thought flashed through his mind, and he revealed an expression of sudden realization. "Oh, I understand. It must be Lin Daoi who told you. After all, you are the #1 genius of your country. Lin Daoi would naturally take special care of you." Ji Tianxing didn't answer. He didn't comment. While everyone was sizing up the geniuses of the various countries, the geniuses of the 5 great empires were also observing Ji Tianxing, Yin Wuk, and the others. The geniuses of the various countries were all proud and arrogant, and they were all competitors. Thus, they looked at the group with cold eyes that even contained a hint of wariness and enmity. Soon, the group arrived outside a resplendent palace. The design and layout of this palace were completely different from the other palaces. It looked like a dark golden dome-shaped temple. This was the temple that worshipped God Lord Taihao. Outside the gate of the temple, there was a spacious square. The ground was paved with huge black stones. A massive ancient stone stele stood in the plaza, densely carved with words that recorded the great achievements of God Lord Taihao and the origin of the Clear Heaven Pagoda. In the corner of the plaza, there were several black stone pillars more than 100 feet tall, carved with the images of ancient beasts. They appeared rather mysterious. Over 100 geniuses from the 6 nations gathered on the black stone plaza and stood in 6 groups. 6 oracles dressed in robes of different colors stood side by side in front of the team, bowing and kowtowing to the gate of the temple. "We have brought our disciples to pay our respects to Divine Lord Taihao." The 6 of them shouted in unison, their tones solemn and respectful. The heavy doors of the temple slowly opened, and a burly, domineering middle-aged man walked out of the temple. This person had white hair and bronze skin. His eyes were large and bright, as vast as the starry sky. He stepped through the gate of the temple and stood on the steps outside. With his hands behind his back, he looked at the crowd with a dignified expression. The 6 divine envoys immediately bowed respectfully and said, "Greetings, Great Guardian." The hundreds of young geniuses also bowed to the Great Guardian. The Great Guardian nodded slightly and waved his palms slowly. He drew out a mysterious seal and chanted an ancient and obscure spell. As he finished casting the spell, an invisible divine power of heaven and earth enveloped the entire temple. The temple instantly exploded with dazzling golden light, making it seem as divine as a celestial palace. This was a necessary part of the worship ceremony, and it had always been this way. Once the Great Guardian was done, he turned and stepped into the temple. The 6 divine envoys then led the young geniuses into the vast temple. The interior of the temple was extremely solemn. In the north was a high platform, upon which stood a dark golden statue 100 feet tall. This statue depicted Divine Lord Taihao, and it was so lifelike that it seemed almost lifelike. Divine Lord Taihao wore a suit of dark golden armor, a wide golden battle robe, and a simple but dignified divine crown on his head. Divine Lord Taihao was seated on a massive throne, his posture upright and dignified. His body exuded a divine aura that seemed to look down upon the world. In his left hand was a divine kingdom codex, while in his right hand was a broad and heavy divine sword. This codex represented the Divine Lord's authority, implying that the laws of the divine kingdom governed the world and ensured eternal peace for its people. The sheathed divine sword represented the Divine Lord's absolute martial strength, implying that the Divine Lord used the sword to expand his territory and protect his divine kingdom. Behind the Divine Lord's statue, the entire wall was covered in reliefs, depicting millions of miles of mountains, rivers, and stars. There were also many words and symbols carved into it. In short, all the young geniuses who had entered the temple were stunned by this divine majesty. Although Divine Lord Taihao's statue was made of precious stones and refining materials, it was not alive. But it possessed the aura of a divine lord, exuding a pressure that could suppress the world. It was like a divine lord had personally arrived. Everyone put aside their distracting thoughts and lined up in neat rows, maintaining a solemn and dignified demeanor. No one made a single noise. The 6 divine envoys stood on the left and right sides of the temple, their hands hanging at their sides. The Great Guardian walked up to Divine Lord Taihao's statue and piously began to recite a long, ancient language. At this moment, Ji Tianxing stood motionless in the crowd, his eyes fixed on Divine Lord Taihao's statue, a strange light flashing through them. For some reason, ever since he had stepped into the temple, his mind had been uneasy, his origin spirit throbbing. When he saw Divine Lord Taihao's statue clearly, his origin spirit trembled, various fragmented scenes appearing in his mind. A sense of familiarity that originated from the depths of his soul flooded his origin spirit, spreading to every nerve in his body. His mind was in chaos, his consciousness somewhat hazy, his body stiffened, his limbs no longer listening to his commands. He could clearly sense that something sealed deep within his soul had unwittingly shattered. Many ancient and complex images and information were surging in his mind, ready to explode at any moment. This strange and unusual feeling was something he had never experienced before. It made him feel both puzzled and shocked. But at this moment, the great guardian finished reciting his incantation. He crossed his arms in front of his chest and bowed to the Divine Lord statue. Then he called out to the crowd, "Let the worship ceremony begin. Disciples, kneel. May Lord Divine Lord's glory last forever." Upon hearing such a solemn and dignified voice, the 100 or so young geniuses all knelt reverently on the ground, their hearts brimming with devotion. Everyone placed their palms flat on the ground, their foreheads pressed against the ground, as they maintained a prostrating posture. The great guardian's dignified gaze swept across the temple. Seeing that all the divine envoys were kneeling, he prepared to recite the second verse. But when he saw Ji Tianqing, his gaze froze, and he fiercely frowned. This was because while everyone in the temple was prostrating on the ground, only Ji Tianqing was still standing. Not only was he standing ramrod straight, but he was also staring straight at Divine Lord Taihao's statue with a blank expression, without the slightest bit of respect. Chapter 1505. Everyone was kneeling down devoutly. Only Ji Tianqing did not kneel, and even dared to look straight at the Divine Master statue. This was absolutely a great disrespect. This was the first time the Great Protector had encountered such a thing in the hundreds of years he had been overseeing the vast heaven pagoda. He did not recite the holy text. His sharp gaze stared at Ji Tianqing, and anger was written all over his face. A formless pressure was released from his body and suppressed towards Ji Tianqing. In order not to affect the worship ceremony, he chose to use this method to remind Ji Tianqing. He believed that even if the white-robed youth was momentarily absent-minded, he would definitely kneel down respectfully after being reminded. Swoosh! The formless pressure enveloped Ji Tianqing, causing his body to tremble twice. His face also became ghastly pale. However, he did not have any reaction. He still stood tall and straight with his eyes looking straight at the Divine Master statue. His expression was still changing. Seeing this scene, the Great Protector was instantly enraged. He thought to himself, "Damn brat, you actually ignored my reminder and still dare to be so rude." The worship ceremony could not proceed for the time being. The Great Protector stared coldly at Ji Tianqing and scolded in a deep voice. "You junior, how dare you? You actually dare to offend the Divine Master's dignity and disrupt the worship ceremony. You really don't know what's good for you. Why aren't you kneeling down and admitting your guilt?" The Great Protector's angry roar suddenly sounded like thunder exploding in the main hall. The hundreds of young geniuses and the 6 divine envoys were all shocked. Everyone turned their heads and looked around the main hall. Finally, their gazes fell on Ji Tianqing. Seeing him standing stiffly on the spot with his eyes looking straight at the Divine Master statue, everyone's expression changed drastically. They revealed complicated expressions. Most of the young geniuses were shocked and puzzled by this. They secretly sized up Ji Tianqing and discussed in whispers, "Who is this guy? He actually dares to behave atrociously in the temple. Is he tired of living? This is the most sacred worship ceremony. Everyone is kneeling down to worship. He actually dares to stand. Looks like he's from the Chuyan Empire. What a disgrace. Is that brat crazy? How dare he lose his composure in front of the Divine Master's statue? Isn't that courting death? The head protector is furious. This brat is finished. He will definitely be punished severely, and even expelled from the vast heaven pagoda." The geniuses of the various countries all looked on coldly, as if they were watching a good show. The young geniuses of the Chuyan Empire were even more shocked, and their expressions became even more complicated. Ji Tianqing has always been arrogant and condescending. I didn't expect him to behave so atrociously in the shrine. That damned bastard. Don't drag us into this mess. When Kuang Long and Lan Yiqing came back to their senses, a cold light flashed in their eyes as they sneered inwardly. "Ha ha ha. I really underestimated this guy. I didn't expect him to be so arrogant that he even dares to offend the Divine Master. Originally, I was still cultivating diligently vowing to surpass him and personally kill him for revenge. Who would have thought that he would offend the Divine Master's dignity in front of so many people? This was a heinous crime. The head protector will definitely punish him severely. It would be best if he is expelled from the vast heaven pagoda. Then, the honor of being the #1 genius of the Chuyan Empire will return to my hands. Yin Wuke was standing behind Ji Tianxing. When he saw this scene, his heart was burning with anxiety, and his eyes were filled with worry. He hurriedly transmitted his voice to Ji Tianxing and shouted, "Young Master Ji, what are you standing there for? Quickly kneel down and pay your respects." "Ji Tianxing, you despicable brat, we are in the shrine now. Don't be stupid." Yin Wuke shouted anxiously. He was so anxious that his face had turned red. Unfortunately, Ji Tianxing did not respond. He also ignored Yin Wuke's voice, and his body was still stiff as he stood there. Lin Daoyi also frowned, and a look of worry and anger flashed in his eyes. When he saw that Ji Tianxing had become the center of attention and was being criticized and mocked, he hurriedly shouted coldly, "Ji Tianxing, you are in the shrine. Do not be rude." However, Ji Tianxing still did not respond. He did not make a sound, and he did not move. He was like a wooden puppet. No one knew that just now, an invisible layer of shackles in the depths of his soul had been broken. Some memories and images sealed in the depths of his soul surged out like a tide, drowning his primordial spirit. His consciousness was swallowed by a black whirlpool, and a vast image appeared in the depths of his soul. In the sky above a vast sea of clouds, 2 figures stood proudly. The figure on the left was a valiant man wearing golden armor and a wide cape. This person was tall and muscular, and his face was dignified. He exuded a domineering aura that looked down on all living things. When he saw this person's face clearly, Ji Tianxing was shocked. This person looked exactly the same as the statue of Divine Master Taihao in the shrine. Obviously, this man in golden armor was martial god Taihao. In the white sea of clouds beneath his feet, half of a dark golden pagoda was revealed. It shone with a sacred golden light. Ji Tianxing immediately recognized that it was the clear sky pagoda. He looked at the second figure in the image. It was a tall young man in white robes. His face was resolute and cold. His eyebrows were sharp and his eyes were bright. His eyes contained a domineering aura that looked down on the world. His attire was rather simple. He only wore a snow-white robe and a pair of black cloth shoes. He had a silver belt around his waist, and his long hair was tied up with a green hairband. When Ji Tianxing saw his face clearly, a trace of fear flashed in the depths of his soul. This white-robed young man's appearance was exactly the same as his, without the slightest difference. However, this white-robed young man was not him, but Qin Shin. At this moment, martial god Taihao bowed to Qin Shin and said solemnly, "I've long heard of Qin Shin's name. It's my honor to invite Qin Shin to Mount God Bestowment." Qin Shin looked at martial god Taihao calmly and nodded slightly. He asked, "Why are you looking for me?" Martial god Taihao did not answer. Instead he asked, "I heard that Qin Shin once sparred with Luo Shui and defeated her in 3 moves. He also enlightened Luo Shui and made her divine power reach the perfection stage?" "That's true," Qin Shin nodded calmly. Martial god Taihao's eyes flickered. He said with anticipation, "I've always admired Qin Shin, and I've long wanted to get to know you. Besides, I believe that my sword principle has reached the perfection stage. No one in the world can defeat me. If I can't spar with you, it'll be my greatest regret." Qin Shin had expected this. He nodded calmly and said, "Please make your move." Martial god Taihao's palm flashed with golden light. A divine sword with a golden sheath appeared, and he assumed a stance. "Qin Shin, draw your sword." Qin Shin shook his head and said calmly, "The sword is in the heart, between the heavens and earth, outside of the rift. It's not in the hand." Chapter 1506. Martial god Taihao's eyes flickered, and he hurriedly bowed to Qin Shin. He said with admiration, "So that's how it is. Thank you, Qin Shin, for enlightening me." Taihao admitted defeat, and he accepted his defeat wholeheartedly. As the ancients say, if one learns of the Tao in the morning, one can die without regrets. Today, after hearing Qin Shin's words, Taihao finally understood the mysteries of the way of the sword. It was boundless and limitless. It's laughable that I used to brag that I was #1 in the way of the sword, and that I was invincible in the Shinwu continent. I was really too blind. Martial god Taihao seemed to have gained enlightenment, and he instantly broke through the shackles of the martial way, discovering an even wider realm of the martial way. He was rather moved, and he was also very respectful towards Kenshin. He accepted him wholeheartedly. After a while, the image gradually faded, and it was about to dissipate. At that moment, a thunderous sound suddenly rang out in Ji Tianqing's soul, jolting him back to his senses. "How dare you? Kneel down and admit your sins." Following this explosive shout, before Ji Tianqing could figure out what was going on, he felt a sharp pain in his body, and his origin spirit began to tremble violently. Boom! Everyone in the shrine had personally witnessed Ji Tianqing being struck by the head protector's palm, and he spat out a mouthful of blood as he flew back dozens of meters. After that, he landed on the ground of the shrine with a bang, and he rolled a few times before coming to a stop. The shrine was silent, and the young geniuses from various countries revealed complicated expressions. Some were in awe of the head protector's might, while others felt pity for Ji Tianqing's fate. There were also a few who rejoiced in his misfortune. As for Kuang Long and Lan Yiqing, the sneers in their eyes became even thicker, and they felt even more pleased and carefree. Only Yin Wuck ignored everyone's strange gazes, and hurriedly crawled up from the ground to support Ji Tianqing. However, just as he rushed to Ji Tianqing's side, he was shouted back by the head protector. "Back off. Go back and kneel properly. Otherwise, you will be punished as well." The head protector's angry shout caused Yin Wuck's body to tremble, and his footsteps became stiff. The pressure of a martial saint enveloped his entire body, and he did not dare to move recklessly. He had no doubt that the great guardian only needed a single thought to crush him into pieces. Lin Dowie also hurriedly transmitted a message to him, telling him to retreat quickly and not make any mistakes. Yin Wukei's expression was extremely ugly. His gaze changed. After hesitating and struggling for a moment, he retreated step by step. Enduring great torment and humiliation, he returned to his original position and silently knelt down. At the same time, Ji Tianqing, who was lying on the ground vomiting blood, slowly stood up. The great guardian's palm strike had not only shattered the image in the depths of his soul and awakened him, but it had also severely injured him. A sharp pain came from his internal organs, as if thousands of needles were stabbing him. He slowly lifted his sleeve to wipe off the blood at the corner of his mouth. His face was expressionless as he coldly swept his gaze across the hall and looked at the great guardian. Only now did he understand what had just happened. When everyone was kowtowing, he became absent-minded and stood out from the crowd, which infuriated the great guardian. However, he did not intend to explain himself. When the great guardian saw that Yin Wukei had regained consciousness, his anger dissipated slightly. He shouted with a dignified expression, "Men, take down this bastard who offended the Divine Master's dignity and disturbed the worship ceremony." As soon as his voice fell, 2 guards in golden armor immediately rushed in from outside the door. Swish swish. 2 golden armored protectors flew to Ji Tianqing's side, one on the left and one on the right, and used their magic power to suppress him. Lin Dowie frowned and hurriedly cupped his hands towards the great guardian. He pleaded, "Great guardian, please wait. This disciple's surname is Ji and his name is Tianqing. I have mentioned him to you before. This person has just arrived and does not know the rules of the temple. Perhaps he was intimidated by the Divine Master's dignity, which is why he lost his composure in front of everyone. Great guardian, please give him a way out." Lin Dowie was obviously hinting to the great guardian that this person was the #1 genius of the Chuyan Empire and had unlimited potential. However, the great guardian glanced at him coldly and shouted in a deep voice, "The vast heaven pagoda is the place where Lord Divine Master imparts the Tao. It is the martial holy land of the 6 nations. How sacred is it? No matter who comes here, everyone is treated equally and must abide by the Divine Kingdom's laws and the vast heaven pagoda's rules. This child offended the Divine Master's dignity in front of everyone and disturbed the worship ceremony. This is an unforgivable crime. Divine Envoy Lin, how do you want this seat to show mercy? Could it be that this seat is going to sit by and watch him offend the Divine Master? This. Lin Daoi was instantly speechless. The Great Guardian spoke righteously. Even if he wanted to plead for Ji Tianxing, he was powerless. Helpless, he could only bow and retreat. The Great Guardian's dignified gaze swept across everyone and said in a deep voice, according to the Divine Kingdom's laws, Ji Tianxing despised the Divine Master and disturbed the worship ceremony. He should be punished with 70 lashes. Immediately escort him to the plaza outside the temple and tie him to a stone pillar. This seat will personally execute him. The 2 golden armored guards acknowledged the order and escorted Ji Tianxing out of the temple and toward the plaza. Only then did everyone understand that the mysterious black stone pillars in the corner of the plaza were actually used for execution. In a short while, the 2 guards escorted Ji Tianxing to the black stone pillar and used a black iron chain with an array to tie him to the stone pillar. The Great Guardian also walked to the stone pillar and reached out to take a dark red long whip from the guards. This long whip was 30 feet long and as thick as a child's arm. It was dark red in color and was surrounded by fierce red flames. This whip was not an ordinary item. It was a top primordial soul realm magic treasure that was refined with external astral fire. If it was whipped on a person's body, not only would the flesh and blood rupture, but the person would also be burned to ashes. Even the primordial soul would be severely injured and suffer extreme pain. If an ordinary primordial soul realm powerhouse was whipped 70 times by the heavenly fire whip, he would definitely be severely injured and would need to recuperate for a few years to recover. Ji Tianxing was tied to the black stone pillar and could not resist at all. He could only silently endure the punishment. Many young geniuses in the temple, as well as the 6 divine messengers, were secretly paying attention to what was happening in the plaza. Everyone's expression was rather complicated, as they secretly communicated with each other through voice transmission. No one had expected such a thing to happen in this year's selection of God's disciples. There were some who sympathized with Ji Tianxing, some who despised him, and some who gloated over his misfortune. In a short while, the Great Guardian held a book of God's nation code in his hands and read out Ji Tianxing's crimes and the corresponding punishment with a dignified expression. Then, he held the heavenly fire whip in his hands and prepared to execute the punishment. Swoosh! He activated a vast amount of Dharma power and infused it into the heavenly fire whip. The long whip immediately became as straight as a sword and burst out billowing waves of fire. The Great Guardian waved his right hand and held the heavenly fire whip in his hand as he whipped Ji Tianxing fiercely. Smack! A crisp sound of an explosion was heard. The long whip with flames rising from it viciously lashed Ji Tianxing's chest. Suddenly, his white robe was torn open, and a dark red bloodstain appeared on his white jade-like skin. At the chopstick-long wound, the flesh and blood were curling outwards. The surface of the skin and flesh had been charred and was emitting wisps of black smoke. Fortunately, his body had been tempered, and his defense was extremely strong. Chapter 1507. Seeing this, the Great Guardian was stunned for a moment and frowned in confusion. He knew very well that the power of the heavenly fire whip could not be so weak. He was puzzled, and was about to increase the strength of the whip to execute the punishment again. However, at this moment, a strong wind suddenly blew in the square. Whoosh! A strong wind came from nowhere and swept across the entire peak of Mount Godseal. The colorful spiritual fog that covered the sky was suddenly blown away by the strong wind. The calm and clear sky was also filled with wind and clouds. Endless black clouds surged in from all directions, gathering in the sky above the temple and the square, causing the world to darken. Purple lightning arcs flashed wildly in the dark clouds and gathered together quickly. Seeing the change in the sky, the Great Guardian was stunned. His eyes were filled with shock and confusion. The 6 divine messengers and hundreds of young geniuses in the temple also looked at the square with confusion. They did not understand what was happening. The Great Guardian frowned and thought for a moment. Suddenly he was enlightened. He pointed at the sky and scolded Ji Tianxing sternly. Rebellious disciple. Do you see this? You have offended the dignity of the Divine Master and angered the heavens. This is the wrath of the heavens. I will punish you severely to appease the anger of the heavens and protect the dignity of the Divine Master." As he spoke, he raised the heavenly fire whip again and injected a vast amount of spiritual power into the long whip. The flames of the heavenly fire whip grew, and its power doubled. Swoosh! The great guardian raised the heavenly fire whip and lashed it at Ji Tianqing fiercely. The powerful heavenly fire whip was about to hit Ji Tianqing's chest. At this moment, a dazzling bolt of lightning suddenly lit up in the dark clouds that covered the sky and struck down toward the square. Kaboom! A deafening sound exploded in the sky and spread across the entire Mount Godseal. A lightning pillar that was thousands of feet tall tore the dark sky apart like a divine dragon and struck the black stone pillar at the corner of the square. Ji Tianqing, the chief enforcer, and the black stone pillar were instantly engulfed by the endless lightning. The stone pillar, which was more than 100 feet tall, was smashed into pieces on the spot. Gravel flew everywhere. An incomparably violent shockwave swept through the entire plaza, along with gravel and lightning arcs. The ferocious heavenly fire whip was actually split into several pieces by the divine lightning and fell into the rubble. The great guardian was also sent flying by the divine thunder and smashed into the square 1,000 feet away. His entire body was charred black, his clothes were ragged, and his long hair was disheveled and curled up with black smoke. Previously, he still had a dignified aura, but now, his head and face were covered in dust, and he was in an extremely sorry state. However, he had the strength of a martial sage, and he was not seriously injured when he was suddenly struck by the sacred lightning. He only ended up in a pathetic state. After a while, the dust and black smoke that filled the sky gradually dispersed. The great guardian crawled up from the ground and saw the situation in the corner of the square. Ji Tianqing, who was wearing a white robe, was actually standing on top of the ruins, completely unharmed. Other than that bloody scar on his chest from being lashed out by the heavenly fire whip, there were no other injuries on his entire body. Seeing this scene, the great guardian was dumbfounded on the spot and cried out in disbelief. Wasn't he struck by the sacred lightning? How can he be safe and sound? No, there must be some problem. Absolutely impossible. A dignified martial sage, the chief enforcer who guarded the vast heaven pagoda, was shocked until he could not be any more shocked, and his state of mind was already in chaos. However, the great changes in heaven and earth were not over yet. Right at this time, an even more shocking scene appeared. God-Sealing Mountain, which was several thousand feet tall and resembled a giant pillar holding up the sky, actually shook violently. The entire giant mountain trembled, giving off a loud rumbling sound as if it was going to collapse. Many palaces and houses also cracked open with cracks, scattering countless gold bricks and glazed tiles. In the plaza outside the temple, the ground also cracked open with a huge ravine, bursting out dust that filled the sky. The scene of the earth shaking was as if doomsday had arrived. Black clouds pressed down in the sky as lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The earth shook violently, splitting open countless ravines. Even the sacred vast heaven pagoda, which pierced into the clouds, also shook violently, bursting with golden light. Things had developed to such a stage that the worship ceremony had already been completely destroyed. The 6 divine messengers and hundreds of young geniuses all rushed out of the temple in a hurry and rushed to the plaza outside the temple. They saw that the plaza had long been distorted and broken, and the ground was covered with wide ravines and gravel. The chief enforcer was covered in dust, and his hair was disheveled as he stood in the plaza. Ji Tianqing, who was dressed in a white robe, stood in the corner of the plaza, safe and sound, his expression cold. The divine messengers and young geniuses were dumbfounded when they saw this scene, completely unable to understand what was going on. The sudden change filled everyone with fear, and they were at a loss for what to do. No one would have thought that such a shocking astronomical change would occur in the martial arts sanctuary that had always been peaceful and auspicious. This was simply illogical. After everyone regained their senses, they all started to discuss doubtfully. Oh my God! How could this be? What exactly happened just now? Why did heaven and earth change so much? And why did the sacred lightning strike? What's wrong with the chief enforcer? Could it be that he was struck by the sacred lightning? Ji Tianqing was actually not injured? This is impossible. He offended the Divine Master's majesty and angered the Divine Master. He should be struck to death by the sacred lightning. For some time, the plaza was noisy and very chaotic. Fortunately, God's ceiling mountain gradually calmed down and stopped shaking. The violent hurricane that filled heaven and earth, the black clouds that covered the sky, and the lightning in the clouds also gradually dissipated. The chief enforcer saw that everyone was in a mess, and hurriedly tidied up his appearance, recovering his dignified posture. He pointed at Ji Tianqing with a face full of anger, and said in an icy and dignified tone, "I believe that everyone saw it. It was precisely because Ji Tianqing offended the Divine Master's majesty that he angered the Divine Master. This madman committed treason, causing heaven and earth to change dramatically. The sacred mountain shook, and sacred lightning fell from the sky. This is the Divine Master's fury and punishment. The vast heaven pagoda already can't tolerate him." Hearing the chief enforcer's explanation, everyone came to a realization and nodded repeatedly to express their agreement. Especially Lan Yiqing, Kuang Long, and the rest. Their faces were full of cold smiles, their eyes surging with a biting cold light. A green-robed divine envoy hurriedly chimed in and shouted with righteous indignation, "For 1,000 years, there has never been an accident here. God's Ceiling Mountain is a martial arts sanctuary that has always been peaceful. But today, Ji Tianqing offended the Divine Master's majesty and disrupted the worship ceremony. He actually caused a monstrous disaster. This envoy suggests that he must be severely punished to appease the Divine Master's anger." Chapter 1508. The great change in heaven and earth just now made everyone both shocked and furious. The divine envoys all agreed with the head protector's decision. Lin Daoi also did not dare to plead for Ji Tianqing when he saw that things had developed to such a stage. Everyone understood that Sealed God Mountain suffered such a drastic change and suffered heavy losses. Ji Tianqing must be severely punished to settle this matter. The head protector took out the Divine Kingdom's law and read out the law with a dignified voice, condemning Ji Tianqing in front of everyone. Ji Tianqing committed treason and blasphemed the Divine Master's dignity. He is not fit to be a divine disciple. According to the Divine Kingdom's law, Ji Tianqing's status as a divine disciple candidate will be immediately abolished and demoted to a divine servant. He will be punished to be sent to the Spirit Beast Valley as a slave. Within 3 years, Ji Tianqing will raise spirit beasts in the Spirit Beast Valley as a sinner and cannot leave his post without permission. After 3 years, we will observe the consequences. Hearing the head protector announce the punishment result, everyone revealed strange expressions. However, the vast majority of people agreed with the head protector's decision. There were even people who felt that the head protector's punishment for Ji Tianqing was already merciful enough. Ji Tianqing stared at the head protector coldly and said in an indifferent tone, "You are a martial saint powerhouse, the head protector guarding the vast heaven pagoda. But you are so muddle-headed and ignorant. I only made an unintentional mistake, but as the person in charge of the vast heaven pagoda, you do not have the heart of a benevolent person. You can't tolerate people's mistakes at all, and easily inflict severe torture. When you were torturing me, the heavens were furious and sent down heavenly punishment, destroying the punishment whip and stone pillar. You also did not distinguish right from wrong, and used your own conjecture to mislead the public and presume to convict me. You are arbitrary and not fit to guard the Dao field for martial god Taihao. You are even more unfit to be the head protector and be in charge of the vast heaven pagoda. Now that things have come to this, not only do you not reflect on your own mistakes, you still want to act willfully and expel me from the vast heaven pagoda. Are you not afraid that heavenly punishment will descend again and turn the entire vast heaven pagoda into ashes?" The cold and sonorous voice spread throughout the entire plaza, shaking everyone's heart and soul. His tone and expression were filled with an unparalleled domineering aura. His entire body erupted with invisible divine might that fiercely suppressed everyone. At that moment, Everyone's primordial spirits were in a daze, and they had an illusion. It was as if the person standing in front of everyone was not a young genius, but a god who looked down on the world and controlled the universe. That formless divine might that looked down on the heavens and earth actually caused the great protector's body to stiffen. His eyes were filled with shock for a long time. After a while, he calmed down and exclaimed in his heart, "This brat only has the strength of an essence spirit realm cultivator. How could he release divine might to intimidate my essence spirit and make me feel fearful?" The 6 divine messengers and the geniuses also came to their senses. No one had expected that after the divine punishment incident, Ji Tianxing's first words would not be to plead for mercy, but to reprimand the great guardian. He actually used an incomparably unyielding attitude and peerlessly domineering aura to belittle the great protector to the point that he was worthless. It felt as if the heavenly punishment was under his control, and it was specifically used to punish the great guardian. Everyone's expression changed drastically, and they began to discuss secretly through voice transmission. "Oh my God, is this brat crazy? How dare he reprimand the great protector so arrogantly? Is he trying to push all the blame away? Too arrogant. This brat's arrogance is simply appalling and unprecedented. Tisk tsk. This has never happened in hundreds of years, and this brat is suddenly famous. This incident will soon spread to all the countries, right? No matter how arrogant he is, it's useless. He will not have a good ending if he goes against the great protector." The great protector also frowned and stared at Ji Tianxing fiercely. He shouted angrily, "Ji Tianxing, you are so arrogant that you have lost your mind. Men, take down this crazy man who is spouting nonsense and immediately send him to the Spirit Beast Valley for punishment." The great protector did not want to waste any more time with him, and he immediately waved his hand to give the order. In fact, he was also a little worried that if he continued to tangle with Ji Tianxing, it would bring about another great change in heaven and earth, and the divine punishment. 4 guards in golden armor immediately flew towards Ji Tianxing, wanting to capture him on the spot. But at this moment, a majestic voice came from the edge of the square. "Her Royal Highness has arrived." Instantly, the great protector, the 6 gods' messengers, and the geniuses from various countries turned their heads to look at the edge of the square. They saw a team of guards in golden armor, carrying an exquisite and luxurious half-moon-shaped throne, running towards the center of the square. On both sides of the throne, there were 2 female guards in silver armor, holding halberds in their hands. On the golden throne, there was a little girl who was 3 feet tall and looked like she was carved from jade. The little girl was wearing a fiery red long dress, and she was barefooted. She had a head of light golden hair, and she looked very cute. But her little face was tense, and her expression was cold. Her aura was also very majestic. Seeing this, many geniuses were puzzled. Which country's princess was this? When the great protector and the 6 gods' messengers saw the arrival of the little princess's throne, their faces turned solemn and respectful. "Welcome, your Royal Highness." The great protector and the 6 gods' messengers immediately went up and bowed in unison. Seeing this, the geniuses from various countries were shocked, and their eyes were filled with shock. The great protector of the martial sage realm and the 6 gods' messengers are actually so respectful to the princess? The 7 white-haired top powers, whose ages added up to a few thousand years, are actually so respectful to the little girl? Even if the 6 sage emperors were present, they would not receive such treatment, let alone the princesses of various empires. At this thought, the geniuses from various countries immediately guessed the identity of Her Royal Highness. This little princess was definitely not the princess of any empire, but the princess of the Holy Kingdom. In the blink of an eye, the guards in golden armor carried the throne to the center of the square and stood still. Sitting on the throne, Jiao looked down at the great protector and the 6 gods' messengers and said coldly, "A good ceremony to worship has been completely ruined by you." Her cold voice was filled with anger. The great protector and the 6 gods' messengers were instantly shocked, and they lowered their heads in fear. Ordinary people would not be able to interact with Her Royal Highness Jiao, and they would not know her character. However, The Great Protector and the rest knew that although Her Royal Highness looked cute, once she was enraged, she would definitely be a demonic girl who would destroy the heavens and earth. The Great Protector was nervous, and he quickly explained, "My Royal Highness, just now in the Holy Hall, I was conducting the ceremony to worship the princess." Ji Tianxing was arrogant and rude and offended the Holy Master. However, before he could explain what had happened, Jiu waved her small hand and interrupted him. "Of course I know what had happened. You don't have to say anything." When the Great Protector saw that she was filled with anger, he thought that she was angry because the ceremony had been ruined and the mountain peak had been destroyed. Therefore, he quickly reported, "My Royal Highness, please calm down. This matter was due to my negligence. I did not expel Ji Tianxing in time and caused the Holy Master to be angry and the heavens and earth to change. According to the laws of the holy nation, I have announced Ji Tianxing's crime and punishment in public. His status as a candidate for God's disciple will be abolished, and he will be demoted to a servant. He will be sent to the Spirit Beast Valley." Jiu looked at the Great Protector coldly. After he finished speaking, she reprimanded him coldly. "That's right. As the Great Protector, you did not manage the situation, and you did not do your duty. However, do you think that the heavens and earth changed, and the scene of the holy thunder, were really caused by the Holy Master's anger? How holy and merciful is the Holy Master? How broad was his mind? How could it be something that you could imagine? How can the Holy Master send down such a punishment in anger, just because a person was disrespectful?" When the Great Protector heard what she had said, he was stunned. The 6 gods' messengers and many geniuses also changed their expressions. The same thought appeared in everyone's mind. If the scene of the wind, clouds, thunder, and lightning in the heavens and earth changing was not caused by the Holy Master's anger and holy punishment, then what was it? If the holy thunder of punishment and the heavens and earth changing were not to punish Ji Tianxing, were they to punish the Great Protector? Chapter 1509. Everyone found it hard to believe Jiu's words, and they were all shocked. However, Jiu's identity was unparalleled. Among everyone present, only she was qualified to say such words, and only she understood Divine Lord Taihao. After all, she was the princess of the God Nation, the daughter of the Divine Lord. If she believed that the great change in the world was not caused by the Divine Lord's anger, then it was definitely not. Just as everyone was in a daze, Jiu announced in a dignified tone, "The Divine Lord has always been wise and virtuous, and cherishes talents. This is known to all the citizens of the God Nation. The Great Guardian's judgment is a little unreasonable, and does not fit the Divine Lord's benevolence. Therefore, I now announce that Ji Tianxing's status as a candidate for a God's disciple will be restored, and he will be punished to clean the Divine Book Pavilion for half a year. This is a small punishment." Hearing this, the Great Guardian and the messenger's expressions changed drastically, and they stared at Jiu with their eyes wide open. They could not believe it, and could not understand. Everyone was extremely confused, and they exclaimed to themselves, "Why would the Little Highness make such a judgment? This is too unreasonable, isn't it? Punishing Ji Tianxing to clean the Divine Book Pavilion? Isn't this an overt punishment and a covert reward?" The Divine Book Pavilion is the top secret place of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and it contains countless ancient books, Taoist scriptures, and secret skills. Not to mention ordinary God's disciples. Even messengers like us only have the chance to enter once or twice a year. The Little Highness actually wants Ji Tianxing to clean the Divine Book Pavilion? Isn't this a great gift and reward? The Little Highness's decision must have a deeper meaning. What ability does this Ji Tianxing have to be able to obtain His Highness's protection and appreciation? Not only the Great Guardian and the God Masters had complicated expressions, but their hearts were also filled with shock and confusion. There were also a few young geniuses who had heard of the Divine Book Pavilion of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and they knew that it was the holy land of books that the experts of the 6 nations dreamed of. These geniuses were Qin Songqiong, Jiang Mingxue, Song Zhanyu, and the rest. They frowned in confusion and looked at Ji Tianxing with burning eyes. They were very wary of him. They were all very clear that Ji Tianxing must have some outstanding aspects, which was why he could cause such a big disturbance, and even obtain the protection of the little princess. On the surface, punishing Ji Tianxing to the Divine Book Pavilion to clean was the little princess punishment for him. But in reality, this was a huge benefit. The thousands of ancient books and records in the Divine Book Pavilion, as well as all kinds of divine skills, were all open for Ji Tianxing to read and study. Even if the geniuses were to clean the Divine Book Pavilion, they would be more than happy to oblige. The great guardian frowned and pondered for a moment. He then cupped his hands and said to Jiao, "Your Highness, you're being too merciful by punishing Ji Tianxing like this." Without waiting for him to finish, Jiao waved her hand and said with a dignified expression, "I have already made up my mind. Carry it out immediately. There must be no mistakes." The words that the great guardian didn't say were all stuffed back down his throat. He could only respectfully bow and say, "Yes, sir." Then, the golden-armored guards carried the throne and left the square. The few divine envoys also brought the geniuses from the various countries out of the square and returned to their residences. The great guardian glanced at Ji Tianxing with a complicated expression before ordering the guards to escort Ji Tianxing to the Divine Book Pavilion. 2 golden-armored guards, one on the left and one on the right, escorted Ji Tianxing to the vast heaven pagoda. The Divine Book Pavilion was located at the top of the vast heaven pagoda. It was heavily guarded, and a true divine level array was set up. Even if a martial saint expert came, they could not possibly force their way into the Divine Book Pavilion either. When Ji Tianxing trio walked to the bottom of the vast heaven pagoda and was about to enter the wide and solemn door, a team of golden-armored guards carried a throne and arrived outside the door of the vast heaven pagoda. On the half-moon-shaped throne sat a little girl, who looked like she was carved from jade. It was Jiao. Ji Tianxing trio stopped in their tracks. The 2 golden-armored guards hurriedly knelt down and bowed to Jiao. Jiao waved her hand, indicating for the 2 guards to retreat for the time being. She looked at Ji Tianxing with a somewhat complicated expression. With a calm tone she warned, "Tianxing, I can only help you up to this point. I know that the God-disciple examination in half a year is very important to you. In this half a year, you can stay in the Divine Book Pavilion and work hard on your cultivation." Ji Tianxing naturally knew that Jiao punished him to clean up the Divine Book Pavilion as a special favor to him. He nodded to Jiao and said with a sincere tone, "Jiao, thank you for helping me so much." Jiao was still a little worried. She warned again, "Tianxing, since such a thing has happened in the vast heaven pagoda, I must return to the divine country to resolve this matter. The great guardian is a fair and strict person, and even a little unreasonable. After I leave, I may have to wait for a few months before returning. In this half a year, try not to go out. Just stay in the Divine Book Pavilion, and don't have any conflicts with the great guardian." Ji Tianxing nodded with a calm expression and did not say anything. As for the truth of the matter, only he knew in his heart. Previously, he had already reprimanded the great guardian in front of everyone. At this moment, he did not want to explain anything. After that, Jiao bid farewell to him and left on the throne. 2 golden-armored guards brought Ji Tianxing into the vast heaven pagoda. The interior of the sacred and lofty vast heaven pagoda was also very solemn. The hall was vast and magnificent. Normally, the vast heaven pagoda's doors were always tightly shut. It was rarely opened. All the god disciples and candidates were not allowed to enter without orders and permission. The first and second levels of the divine pagoda were spacious and bright halls. There were rows of black stone doors in the surroundings. Every stone door was tightly shut. Mysterious and profound arrays were carved on it, as well as various special patterns. Different names were written on the lintel of the doors. For example, Small Spirit Sky, Pure Jade Sea, Lava World, Ancient Desolate Desert, and so on. Ji Tianxing roughly glanced at it. He felt puzzled and secretly guessed. Could it be that behind those stone doors, there are secret rooms with different environments? Or could it be that every stone door has a passageway that leads to different alternate spaces? After 15 minutes, The two golden armored guards brought him to the 5th level of the vast heaven pagoda. The 5th and 6th levels of the divine pagoda were the sacred divine book chambers. There were thousands of ancient books, ancient records and secret techniques. The two golden armored guards handed Ji Tianxing to a white-haired old woman in a black robe and long skirt. After explaining the situation, they left. This black-robed old woman looked to be white-haired. Her body was as thin as a bamboo pole, and her skin was as dry as tree bark. Her entire body was shrunk in the black robe. Only a pair of turbid green eyes could be seen. She looked somewhat sinister and strange. However, Ji Tianxing could feel that the old woman's aura was strong and mysterious. She was a martial sage. The old woman was the pavilion elder, who guarded the divine book chambers. She was also the second guardian of the vast heaven pagoda. Her status was similar to that of the great guardian. When she found out that Ji Tianxing was punished by Jiao to clean up the divine book chambers, a glint of light flashed past her eyes. She arranged a secret room for Ji Tianxing to stay in and let him settle down. Chapter 1510. Although the Divine Book Pavilion is the core of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and there are over 18 million ancient books and records stored within, but cleaning the Divine Book Pavilion is an extremely easy task. Normally, very few people enter the Divine Book Pavilion, and this place is protected by an array, so it is impossible for dust to accumulate here. The second guardian's voice was deep and hoarse, as he slowly explained the situation to Ji Tianxing. Normally, you just stay in the secret room, and don't bother about those books. Go there every day to check which books are not placed properly, and just place them properly. If some books are too old and need to be repaired or rewritten, you can bring them to me. When she spoke, she was like an old bellows, as if she could stop breathing at any time, and occasionally she would cough a few times. Ji Tianxing listened quietly, and when she finished, he opened his mouth to ask, "If there is nothing else, then I will take my leave." "Wait a moment." The second guardian waved his withered hand and warned in a low voice, "The Divine Book Pavilion is divided into 2 levels, and you can only move around the 5th level. Without my permission, you cannot enter the 6th level." Ji Tianxing knew that the 6th level definitely hid important secrets, or top secret techniques, so he could not casually enter. He nodded his head to show that he understood, and cupped his hands to bid farewell to the second guardian, before turning around and returning to the secret room. The second guardian looked at his departing figure, and a strange glow flashed across his muddy old eyes. This kid was actually punished by the young highness. Seems a little interesting. She had guarded the Divine Book Pavilion for over 1,000 years, and had long been used to this kind of quiet and dull life. Darkness and loneliness had accompanied her for many years, causing her to grow old, and there was not the slightest bit of life in her body. In these 1,000 years, she had spent 90% of her time alone, hiding in the darkness. Now that someone had come to the Divine Book Pavilion, and had to stay here for half a year, in the next few months, she should not be lonely and dull. In reality, it was not that Ji Tianxing was not interested in the Divine Book Pavilion. At this moment, the things that had happened before kept replaying in his mind. He only wanted to enter the secret room as soon as possible, and quietly think for a while. There were no furnishings in the gloomy secret room, only a futon made of spiritual jade. Ji Tianxing sat cross-legged on the praying mat, and closed his eyes to meditate. Soon he calmed his mind. When his mind and spirit became one, the image appeared in the depths of his soul. They were still high up in the sky, at the peak of the vast sea of clouds. Martial god Taihao and Qinshan stood proudly in the air, and talked to one another. At this moment, there was nothing to disturb him. The image in the depths of his soul was incomparably clear. Every glance and action of martial god Taihao and Qinshan was clearly reflected in his soul. He watched the scene of the two deities sparring again, memorizing their expressions, reactions and movements, as well as every word they said. After a long time, the soul image dissipated. He frowned and muttered to himself, "The sword is in the heart, in the world, outside the void, but not in the hand." These were Qinshan's exact words. With these words, Qinshan was able to convince martial god Taihao and make him bow his head and admit defeat. However, Ji Tianqing frowned and thought for a long time, but he still couldn't understand the meaning of these words. He also couldn't understand why martial god Taihao would willingly admit defeat and respect Kenshin so much after hearing these words. Maybe my cultivation is too low. I haven't reached the martial god realm, so I can't understand the mysteries behind these words? He firmly remembered Kenshin's words and put this matter aside for now. Then, he remembered the statue of martial god Taihao in the temple. Behind the lifelike statue, the wall was carved with pictures of mountains, rivers, the sun, the moon, and stars. At the time, he saw with his own eyes that there was a very special picture on the wall. The picture was as big as a wash basin. The lines were simple and abstract, as if they contained some deep meaning. He carefully pondered for a while, and came up with an answer in his mind. That special and mysterious picture, is it a kind of seal that represents Divine Lord Taihao's status and authority? In the world of martial arts, many powerful organizations, empires, and aristocratic families had their own emblems and seals to show their strength and noble status. A martial god like Divine Lord Taihao, one of the 3 overlords of the Shinwu continent, would definitely have a corresponding seal. When he thought of this, he immediately recalled the ancient book he had found in the imperial palace before leaving the Tianxian continent. At the end of the ancient book, there was also a mysterious seal. He compared that mysterious seal with martial god Taihao's seal, and confirmed that they were not the same. What does the seal in that ancient book mean? Which organization does it represent? Ji Tianqing was full of doubts, but after thinking for a while, he came up with a solution. Right, this is the Divine Tome Pavilion, and it has a collection of more than 10 million ancient books. According to the second protector, the ancient books here not only record all kinds of divine techniques, but also the history and secrets of the Shinwu continent over the past 10,000 years. I'll go to the Divine Tome Pavilion to look for information. Perhaps I can find some information about that seal. After making up his mind, Ji Tianqing stood up and walked out of the secret room. He arrived at the 5th level of the Divine Tome Pavilion, and looked at the thousands of neatly arranged bookshelves with an expectant gaze. There were more than 5,000 bookshelves in the spacious and bright hall, and they were divided into 5 different areas according to their categories. Some areas were filled with books on cultivation methods, some were filled with books on medicine and pills, and some were filled with books on the Tao of formations. He found the area that stored the history books and biographies, and sat down cross-legged on the ground. He circulated his energy and released his divine sense, enveloping hundreds of bookshelves. There were more than 1 million books in this area, and flipping through them with one's eyes was definitely a huge undertaking. Using his divine sense to read was undoubtedly the fastest method. Time quickly passed, and before he knew it, a day had passed. Throughout the day, he had used his divine sense to read more than 100,000 books, absorbing a vast amount of words and knowledge. This allowed him to gain a deeper understanding of the Shinwu continent's words and history. His greatest gain was finding out the origin of that mysterious seal, as well as information and deeds related to Kenshin. As for the mysterious mark, it wasn't a secret at all. This was because that mysterious seal was the insignia of one of the 3 overlords of the Shinwu continent, the Luoshui martial god. After understanding this point, Ji Tianqing's doubts were easily resolved, and a huge rock that had been hanging in the air was lifted. It's actually the Luoshui martial god's seal, which means that the prefecture lord is working for the Luoshui martial god. Since the prefecture lord brought Yao Yao to the Shinwu continent, he must have sent her under the Luoshui martial god. Chapter 1511. Ji Tianqing had managed to find out Yun Yao's whereabouts with just a few clues. Although he could not see Yun Yao for the time being, he believed that there would be results in half a year. In this half a year, what he needed to do was to frantically increase his strength. When he had checked the mysterious imprint, he had used his consciousness to scan hundreds of thousands of ancient books. These books recorded the history of Shinwu continent, as well as the events of the past few thousand years. There were thousands of history books that mentioned Kenshin's deeds and news. Ji Tianqing calmed down and recalled the contents of these books. He quickly sorted out his thoughts. He also had a clearer understanding of the sword god's life, and the various legends and deeds he had done. 1,580 years ago, a mysterious white-robed youth had appeared on the Shinwu continent. At that time, he had been a nobody, and he had been alone. He wore a white robe and a pair of cloth shoes, and he held an ancient pitch-black sword as he walked the world. No one knew where he had come from, and no one knew where he had gone. His cold arrogance and loneliness seemed to have been innate, making it impossible for anyone to approach him. His first battle was the battle that had made him famous. The top youth genius of the Misty Flow Empire, a powerhouse at the 9th level of the primordial spirit realm, had been defeated by a single sword strike at the peak of the imperial city. His unfathomable and transcendent swordsmanship caused many experts to exclaim in admiration. In a short 3 years, the white-robed youth had appeared in a neighboring country. 2 Tribulation Realm powerhouses had led many primordial spirit powerhouses to besiege him. On Moonset Peak, he had single-handedly killed more than 10 primordial spirit powerhouses with his sword, and he had even destroyed the souls of the 2 Tribulation Realm powerhouses. It was said that at that time, his sword light had traversed 15,000 kilometers, and his sword had been like the moon splitting the heavens. From then on, the white-robed youth had gained a name, and he was known as Kenshin. In the following 30 years, Kenshin was like a traveler, crossing over a dozen empires. The name Kenshin had attracted countless criticisms, as well as attacks for no reason. However, he had crossed over the territories of the 3 divine kingdoms, and fought with various powerhouses. He had fought thousands of times, but he had never been defeated. From 3rd Tribulation Martial Lords to 5th Tribulation Martial Lords to 9th Tribulation Martial Lords, they were all defeated by his sword. He had once been surrounded and heavily injured, his blood staining the sky. However, he would rather break than submit and press forward courageously. 30 years later, when he arrived at the martial holy land of the Luo River Divine Nation, he was already a martial saint. From then on, people were surprised to find that the sword in Kenshin's hand had disappeared. No matter how strong his opponent or enemy was, he was always empty-handed. The mysterious black sword would only appear out of thin air at the critical moment of his battle with the enemy and defeat him with a single strike. Legend has it that Kenshin was carefree and unrestrained throughout his life. He was not bound by anyone and never owed anyone favors. After he had reached the martial sage realm, he had set up a training ground at the peak of the Pillar of Heaven's mountains and used the 9 heavens wind lightning flame to practice his swordsmanship. Furthermore, he had announced that he was inviting martial saints from all over the world to challenge him. In just 20 years, he had defeated more than 30 martial sages and had never been defeated. Kenshin's name was like the sun in the sky, and he had intimidated the entire Shinwu continent. He was second only to the 3 martial gods. However, for some reason, when his reputation was at its peak, he had disappeared for 20 years. No one knew where he had gone during those 20 years. However, when Ji Tianxing saw this information and combined it with the history he had learned in the Tianxian continent, he immediately guessed the answer. During those 20 years, Kenshin had gone to the Tianxian continent to suppress the ancient demon emperor. Many years later, in a secret realm of the Luo River Divine Nation, a divine light that covered the sky lit up. Half of the divine nation was covered by this light, and it did not disappear for 3 months. According to the historical records, this divine light was a phenomenon of a martial saint becoming a martial god. Not long after, a piece of shocking news spread from the Luo River Divine Nation's divine palace. Kenshin had returned. Moreover, Sword God and Luoshui Martial God had fought in the 9 heavens and defeated Luoshui Martial God in 3 moves. After that, Kenshin had even enlightened Martial God Luo River, allowing him to comprehend on the spot and reach the realm of great perfection in his divine arts. When this news spread, the entire Shinwu continent was in an uproar, and Kenshin's name became well known. In the following years, it was said that Martial God Taihao and Martial God Tianjue had challenged Kenshin. However, without exception, they were all defeated by the Sword God in less than 3 moves. From then on, Kenshin had become the undisputed #1 powerhouse, and he had even surpassed the three martial gods. After all, in the tens of thousands of years since ancient times, no one had been able to go from the primordial spirit realm to the martial god realm in just 80 years. This was the #1 monster that had never been seen before and would never be seen again. However, after Kenshin had reached the martial god realm, he had not stayed in the Shinwu continent for too long. 1,500 years ago, Kenshin had ascended from the peak of Tianju Mountain and left the continent for the higher realms. After this news spread, the world's powerhouses were once again in an uproar, and they all worshipped Kenshin to the extreme. The three martial gods and countless martial saints were even searching for the things that Kenshin had left behind, hoping to find a way to ascend to the higher realms. The historical records clearly stated that after the War of the Gods had ended in ancient times, this world had been sealed by the gods. The 5 continents had been isolated, and the heavens and earth had been sealed by invisible shackles, preventing anyone from ascending to the higher realms. In the 30,000 years since ancient times, several martial gods had appeared on the Shinwu continent. However, those martial gods had been restricted by the heavens and earth's seal, and they had never been able to ascend. In the end, they could only die of old age, turning into withered bones and yellow earth, leaving behind endless regrets. Kenshin's successful ascension had brought hope to the entire world, and it had also allowed the powerhouses of the world to see the light. However, countless powerhouses had searched through everything related to Kenshin, but they had not been able to find any clues about how to ascend to the higher realms. Everyone had despaired, and in the end, they could only give up regretfully. For the next 500 years, the three martial gods had used some special methods to obtain information about Kenshin. It was said that Kenshin had explored the higher realms and reached the pinnacle of martial arts, becoming the ruler of the astral river. However, 1,000 years ago, a shocking piece of news had spread throughout the Shinwu continent. Kenshin had fallen. Kenshin, who had once been able to unleash a single sword beam and intimidate 30 nations with his sword chi, had actually fallen. When the news spread, the heavens and earth shook, and millions of warriors knelt on the ground and wept. Countless powerhouses were sad. In outer space, countless stars fell like raindrops, and this continued for 3 days and 3 nights. On the Shinwu continent, dark clouds covered the sky and did not disperse for 7 days. The most dazzling powerhouse had fallen, and the legend of the Way of the Sword had vanished. Kenshin's life story had come to an end, and Ji Tianxing gathered his thoughts and sighed with a heavy heart. In a short 80 years, he went from the primordial spirit realm to the martial god realm, the first person to ascend in 30,000 years, the ruler of the astral river. Chapter 15:12. Time passed silently. The following month passed in complete silence. Only Ji Tianxing and the second enforcer remained in the Divine Tome Pavilion. The second enforcer was nowhere to be seen, either napping in the darkness or resting with his eyes closed. The two rarely met, nor did they speak to each other. The entire Divine Tome Pavilion was so quiet that one could hear a pin drop. During this month, Ji Tianxing remained on the 5th floor of the Divine Tome Pavilion, not taking a single step out. He did not cultivate, but instead flipped through the ancient books on the various bookshelves. With his powerful perception and photographic memory, he quickly learned the Shinwu continent's language and knowledge, as well as its history and geography. In just a month, he had read more than 300,000 books and scrolls. He understood the history of the Shinwu continent, the origins and situation of the 3 divine kingdoms, and the rise and fall of the various empires. He even knew the territories of the 10 or so Lianaire empires, as well as the famous mountains and cities within their borders. The ancients once said that reading 10,000 books was like walking 10,000 miles. Ji Tianxing remained in the Divine Tome Pavilion, not taking a single step out. In just a month, he had read more than 300,000 books, and it was as if he had traversed the entire Shinwu continent. This feeling of knowing the world and reaping bountiful rewards left him in a good mood. It would also be of great help to his future plans. At the very least, he would know where the Luoshui Divine Kingdom was, and where the sacred land of martial arts was. If he left the Clear Sky Pagoda and went to the Luoshui Divine Kingdom to find Yun Yao, which route should he take? Early in the morning, Ji Tianqing stood in front of the bookshelves as usual, quietly flipping through the books. The ancient black book in his hands was called Travels to the North, and it contained some records about the Pillar of Heaven. Just as he was engrossed in reading, a thin figure wrapped in a black robe silently appeared beside him. Under the loose black robe, half of the person's shriveled old face was revealed. She had a lock of white hair and a pair of turbid green eyes. It was none other than the black-robed old woman, the second protector. She glanced at the ancient book in Ji Tianqing's hand and couldn't help but frown. She opened her mouth and said, "Kid, for the past month, you've been reading books without sleep or food. This is a good thing. But why don't you read all those supreme martial arts and secret skills? Instead, you read those useless history books and travel books all day long." Ji Tianqing was awakened by her voice. He turned to glance at her and nodded in greeting. Seeing his calm and indifferent look, the second guardian was a little angry. He said in a low voice, "Do you know how many gods' disciples and experts dream of entering the holy land of martial arts? There are millions of books on the bookshelf. You just have to pick a few to cultivate, and it will benefit you for life. You little brat, you've wasted the young highness' good intentions and cultivation. You're actually so ignorant and ignorant. You're really disappointing." Her voice was low and hoarse. She looked at Ji Tianqing with eyes full of disappointment, as if she expected better from him. Ji Tianqing slowly closed the black ancient book and raised his eyebrows as he looked at the second guardian. He pointed at the bookshelves that stored the cultivation method manuals and asked, "Second guardian, are you asking me to read those cultivation method manuals?" "Humph, you know the answer. You're really a rotten wood that can't be carved." The second guardian looked angry and snorted with displeasure. Ji Tianqing shook his head and said indifferently, "Those cultivation method manuals are all mediocre. There's no need to look at them." "What?" The second guardian frowned and stared at him. A touch of anger flashed in his sharp eyes. "What an arrogant kid. You really don't know the immensity of heaven and earth. It's a pity that the young highness' efforts have gone down the drain." In the second guardian's view, Ji Tianqing was not only a piece of rotten wood, but also an idiot who didn't know what was good for him. She didn't want to argue with Ji Tianqing. She just felt that it was not worth it for the young princess. However, she didn't think that Ji Tianqing was telling the truth. The books in the Divine Book Pavilion were indeed worthless to him. There was no need to waste time looking at them. Compared to the Heavenly Book Pavilion in Kenshin's tomb, how could the books here be considered worthless? They were simply rubbish. In this Divine Book Pavilion, the only books that Ji Tianqing found useful were the history books and geographical travel notes. After a moment of silence, the second guardian's anger gradually subsided. She said coldly, "Just now, a guard came to report that the envoy of the White Knight Empire had escorted a batch of books to the foot of Mount God Bestowment. You immediately rushed down the mountain to receive the books from the White Knight Empire and bring them back to the Divine Book Pavilion." Ji Tianqing had already stayed in the Divine Book Pavilion for a month. He knew where the 10 million books came from. The 6 empires had been collecting all kinds of books to offer to the Clear Sky Pagoda regularly. After countless years of accumulation, the books in the Divine Book Pavilion could reach such a scale. "Okay." Ji Tianqing put down the black ancient book, cupped his hands to the second guardian, and turned to leave. He calmly left the Divine Book Pavilion, walked out of the Clear Sky Pagoda, and flew down Mount God Bestowment. He knew that Mount God Bestowment was the holy land of martial arts of the Clear Sky Kingdom. It was also the place where martial god Clear Sky taught. The people of the 6 empires could not casually approach this holy land. Without the permission of the Clear Sky Pagoda, no one could ascend Mount God Bestowment. Otherwise, it would be an affront to the authority of the Divine Master, and would be severely punished. The envoy of the White Knight Empire could only wait at the foot of Mount God Bestowment. He was not qualified to ascend the mountain. At the foot of the steep Mount God Bestowment, there was an open space with a radius of 10,000 feet. This open space was relatively flat, and the ground was paved with white marble, forming a small square. There was a huge stone tablet erected in the square, and the words Mount God Bestowment were engraved on it. In addition, there was a line of small red words on the stone tablet. It said, "Holy Land of Martial Arts, no trespassing." Usually, if the warriors and commoners of the 6 empires wanted to make a pilgrimage to Mount God Bestowment, they would come to this square to pay their respects to Mount God Bestowment. At this moment, there were 2 majestic middle-aged men in black armor in the square. Both of them were burly and had a dignified aura. They were dressed like generals. The man on the left had thick eyebrows and big eyes. He was at the 9th level of the Essence Soul realm. The man on the right had a thin face. His eyes flickered with a sharp aura. His strength was at the 1st level of the Tribulation Transcendence realm. The 2 of them stood side by side in the square, looking up at the sea of clouds above. Their expressions were grave. While waiting, the 2 of them were secretly discussing through voice transmissions. "General Du, we are under the Sage Emperor's orders. We are taking the opportunity of paying tribute to the book collection to come to the Clear Sky Pagoda to find Ji Tianxing. We are waiting for an opportunity to snatch the Burial of Heaven sword. This plan was originally flawless, but we can't even ascend Mount God Bestowment. What should we do? Deputy General Li, don't be anxious. This is a holy land of martial arts. We cannot be rash. It doesn't matter even if we can't enter. We have already gotten a guard to send a transmission jade slip to Songjianyu." Chapter 15:13. The morning sun slowly rose to the sky. General Du and Deputy General Li waited in the square for 2 hours, but no one came to receive the book. Both of them were a little anxious, but because of the order, they could only wait patiently. Not long after, a white figure suddenly flew out of the sea of clouds halfway up the mountain. It was a young man in a white robe, flying in the wind and landing from Mount God Bestowment. Seeing the white-robed young man appear, Deputy General Li was relieved and said with relief, "General Du, that person should be here to receive the tribute. When we hand in the tribute, the task will be completed." General Du nodded and said, "After handing in the tribute, we will hide under Mount God Bestowment and wait for that guy to appear. It is said that the other 2 empires also know about the news of the Sword of Burial of Heaven, and they seem to be secretly moving and sending people here. At that time, things will be very tricky." Deputy General Li had been looking up at the sky, watching the white-robed figure getting closer and closer. Suddenly he frowned, and a flash of light flashed in his eyes. He asked, "General Du, look at that white-robed young man. Why does he look so familiar?" "Familiar?" General Du was stunned for a moment. He fixed his eyes on the white-robed young man in the sky, and suddenly his face changed. "He does look familiar. This person's figure, appearance and style of clothing are a bit like Ji Tianxing." As General Du said, a white light flashed in his palm, and a picture scroll appeared. In the picture scroll was a white-robed young man, holding a dark and mysterious sword. It was Ji Tianxing, and the Sword of Burial of Heaven. General Du glanced at the picture, and then looked up at the white-robed young man in the sky, and a flash of surprise flashed in his eyes. "It's really him. Great, God is really helping me. I didn't expect that the person who came to receive the tribute was Ji Tianxing. It's really a case of searching high and low for something, and finding it without any effort." As he said this, a white light flashed in his palm, and the picture scroll was put away. Deputy General Li was also very excited, and he asked, "General Du, should we do it directly or after handing in the tribute?" General Du sneered inwardly, and warned him with a sound transmission, "Don't worry. Hand in the tribute first. After confirming his identity, you can snatch the sword." Deputy General Li hesitated and asked in a rather worried manner, "But we've come as envoys. If we directly take action, and the matter is exposed, won't we cause trouble for the Saint Emperor?" General Du was startled for a moment and said in a cold tone, "Let's seize the sword first. If he wants to die, then we'll kill him. Anyway, he is just a candidate of a God's disciple. When the time comes, there will be no evidence. If we don't act today, we won't have another chance in the future." Hearing this, Deputy General Li no longer hesitated and made up his mind. Not long after, Ji Tianqing descended from the sky and landed on the square. He stood in the field expressionlessly and looked at General Du and Deputy General Li indifferently. The two of them hurriedly went up to Ji Tianqing and stood in front of him. They put on a respectful posture and bowed. The envoy of the White Knight Empire is here to deliver the tribute under the orders of the Holy Emperor. May I ask if this young master is here to deliver the tribute? Yes. Ji Tianqing glanced at the two of them and nodded slightly. Present the tribute. General Du quickly took out a black ring from his sleeve and handed it to him respectfully. Young master, there are more than 7,000 books in this ring, including 2,000 volumes of alchemy books, 3,000 volumes of secret methods, and more than 1,000 volumes of array diagrams. General Du looked at Ji Tianqing with a smile and introduced the number of tributes to him. However, Ji Tianqing was not interested in this. He said with an indifferent expression, "Thank you for your trouble. Please go back." After that, he put away the black ring and turned to leave. "Wait," General Du shouted and said, "Please tell us your name and let us know who the tribute is delivered to. It will be convenient for us to go back and report to the Saint Emperor." Ji Tianqing. Ji Tianqing said his name and flew to the sky without looking back. He was about to leave. After confirming Ji Tianqing's identity, General Du did not hesitate and immediately attacked. A golden light flashed in his palm, and a dark golden sword appeared. He waved the sword at Ji Tianqing without any explanation. Swoosh! The incomparably sharp sword light instantly streaked across the sky and ruthlessly slashed at Ji Tianqing's back. Boom! In the muffled sound, the golden light splashed and Ji Tianqing was sent flying by the sword light. The white robe on his back had a large hole torn open by the sword light, revealing a shallow bloodstain that seeped with blood. Fortunately, his physical defense was strong, and he was suddenly attacked, but he only suffered a minor injury. If it was an ordinary 5th-level Essence Soul Master, he would have been cut in half on the spot. The sudden change made Ji Tianqing's face change dramatically. He turned around and looked at General Du and Deputy General Li, his eyes emitting a cold light. "You are courting death," he shouted angrily, and immediately stabilized his body and stopped at the edge of the square. Swoosh! A black light flashed in his right hand, and the sword of burial of heaven appeared in his hand, emitting a cold and powerful aura. Ji Tianqing, if you know what's good for you, hand over the sword of burial of heaven, and I can spare your life. General Du growled with a murderous look. Ji Tianqing heard and was shocked. These two know about the sword of burial of heaven? And they want to snatch my sword. Before he could think carefully, General Du and Deputy General Li had rushed in front of him. The two of them attacked him from the left and right, waving their swords and slashing out sword light that covered the sky and earth. Hundreds of crisscrossing sword light not only contained the power to destroy heaven and earth, but also flashed with traces of purple lightning. This was the proof of a Tribulation Realm Master. Ji Tianqing immediately frowned and looked serious. The mana in his body also burst out crazily. Dharma body of heaven and earth. He used his secret skill and drew the power of heaven and earth within 1,000 miles to condense an oval-shaped 5-colored shield to protect himself. The sword light that descended from the sky slashed the shield fiercely, causing a loud kacha-kacha sound to ring out. In the blink of an eye, the 5-colored shield was smashed and dissipated on the spot. Ji Tianqing was also hit by dozens of sword light and was sent flying into the valley thousands of feet away. His heaven and earth Dharma body secret skill was a secret skill with strong defensive power. Even a 7th or 8th tier Essence Soul Realm Master might not be able to defeat it. But General Du's strength had reached the Tribulation Realm. Deputy General Li, who was slightly weaker, also had the strength of a 9th tier Essence Soul Realm Master. The difference in strength between the two parties was too great. They were not at the same level at all. Ji Tianqing was only sent flying and suffered minor injuries. This was enough to shock and disbelief the two of them. Damn brat, he's actually quite capable. He only has the strength of an Essence Soul Realm Master, but he can withstand 2 of our attacks and not die. This is incredible. Cut the crap. Let's end this quickly, and snatched the sword in his hand as soon as possible. General Du and Deputy General Li secretly communicated with each other through voice transmission. Then, they unleashed their full strength and rushed toward Ji Tianxing with murderous intent, besieging him with all their might. They knew very well that they were at the foot of Mount God Bestowment. The commotion caused by the two parties fighting would quickly alert the golden armored guards. Chapter 15-14. Ji Tianxing was sent flying 10 miles away, leaving the square and falling into the valley. Before he landed, General Du and Deputy General Li rushed over again, waving their swords and sending out dozens of sword auras, enveloping his figure. At the critical moment, Ji Tianxing used the spirit concealment step, and his figure disappeared instantly. He passed through the gaps between the sword auras and flew 10 miles away. However, General Du used the Heaven's Eye secret technique and immediately detected his tracks and chased after him with his sword. Soaring dragon of the sky, General Du unleashed all of his power, waving his sword and sending out a sky full of golden light, which condensed into 200-meter-long golden light dragons, charging towards Ji Tianxing. Ji Tianxing's face was grim. He waved the Burial of Heaven sword with all of his strength, thrusting out 7 dazzling sword auras. 7-star sword. The 7 blazing white giant swords, surrounded by violent lightning, pierced towards the 2 golden light dragons. Bang 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 bang. With a series of muffled explosions, the golden light dragons and the sword auras exploded at the same time, turning into fragments that covered the sky and earth. The loud noise reverberated in the valley. The violent shockwave wrapped around the fragments, fiercely hitting the mountain walls and the ground. The ground was blasted open with a radius of more than 10 miles, and the surrounding mountain walls also cracked open with huge cracks. Ji Tianxing was once again sent flying 10,000 meters away, and before he could stabilize his body, Deputy General Li attacked from the side again. Whoosh whoosh whoosh. Dozens of sharp sword auras all pierced Ji Tianxing. His magical power shield immediately collapsed, and his whole body was also thrown out, crashing heavily into the mountain wall. A large crater was created on the mountain wall, and spiderweb-like cracks appeared, bursting out dust into the sky. Without waiting for him to recover, General Du and Deputy General Li rushed over again with murderous intent. The two of them wanted to use the most violent attacks to kill Ji Tianxing in the shortest time possible and take away the Burial of Heaven sword. Ji Tianxing was beaten back and could only rely on the golden rock wings, the Burial of Heaven sword, and various secret techniques to resist the attacks of the two. However, the 3 of them did not know that there were 2 sharp eyes secretly staring at them. They were 2 black-clothed and bronze-masked powerhouses. They were hiding in a valley about 15 kilometers away. The 2 of them hid in a cluster of rocks, using a special secret technique to merge with the rocks, making it impossible for people to detect them. The 2 of them stared at the battle between Ji Tianxing and the other 2, and talked to each other through voice transmission. Those 2 guys claimed to be envoys of the White Knight Empire, using the opportunity of tribute, forcibly snatched the Burial of Heaven sword. They are really too arrogant. The thin black-clothed man asked the burly old man beside him. Wang Duozhu, aren't those 2 guys afraid of being exposed and bringing trouble to the White Knight Empire? The black-clothed man called Wang said in a playful tone. The Burial of Heaven sword is the first magic sword in the world, a treasure that countless strong men dream of. The White Knight Holy Emperor must have given a death order to let those 2 guys snatch the Burial of Heaven sword no matter what. Isn't our Lord Thousand Snow Holy Emperor the same? She wants us to snatch the Burial of Heaven sword at all costs, even by fair means or foul. The skinny black-clothed man asked anxiously. We have been lurking here for more than 20 days, and it's not easy to wait for Ji Tianxing to appear. We must not miss this opportunity. Wang, I think Ji Tianxing can't hold on any longer. When should we make a move? Deacon Sun, don't worry. Let Ji Tianxing and those 2 guys fight until both sides are injured. Then, we'll sit back and reap the benefits. Division Leader Wang's tone was filled with treachery. Deacon Sun was shocked and whispered in disbelief. Both sides are injured? How is this possible? Even if Ji Tianxing has the Burial of Heaven sword in his hand, it's impossible for him to beat those two. Wang shook his head gently and said in a firm tone, Ji Tianxing is the first genius of the Chuyin Empire. His strength must be extraordinary. Moreover, the Burial of Heaven sword is Kenshin's sword. How can it only have this little power? Be patient and watch. Just as division leader Wang finished speaking, a heaven-shaking explosion suddenly came from the valley 15 kilometers away. A giant golden sword over 10,000 feet tall suddenly appeared and slashed viciously at Deputy General Li with a terrifying might. Deputy General Li was sent flying by the giant sword on the spot, vomiting blood as he flew 10 miles away, and smashed into the valley. The sudden change also startled General Du, and his face was full of disbelief. Ji Tianxing, how is this possible? Ji Tianxing stood in the sky with ragged clothes and disheveled hair, casting a spell to control the primordial spirit golden sword that was thousands of feet high. He stared at General Du coldly and shouted in a cold voice, You too, as the envoys of the White Knight Empire, how dare you besiege and kill a candidate of the god's disciple at the foot of Mount God Bestowment? Aren't you afraid that the Divine Lord Taihao will punish the White Knight Empire if this matter is exposed? General Du held the sword in his hand, and his whole body was surrounded by electric light. He shouted in a contemptuous tone, Ji Tianxing, don't flatter yourself. You're just a candidate of the god's disciple, and it's no big deal to kill you. The Divine Lord will never care about such a trivial matter, so how can he punish you? If you don't hand over the Burial of Heaven sword, you'll definitely die. As General Du spoke, his whole body surged with electric light, and the phantom of a giant beast that was thousands of feet high appeared behind him. The giant beast looked like a rhinoceros, but it only had one leg, and the two curved horns on its head were surrounded by purple electric dragons. This was General Du's primordial spirit Dharma Laksana, the legendary thunder beast Kuei Ox. His primordial spirit Dharma Laksana was very special, and it could control thunder and lightning. This was very rare, and countless strong men in the Tribulation Realm were envious and in awe. General Du made a Taoist gesture with both hands, and the giant phantom of the Kuei Ox immediately condensed a huge ball of electric light, which locked onto Ji Tianxing's primordial spirit Dharma Laksana. Are you going to hand it over or not? General Du shouted angrily with a murderous look. Ji Tianxing also activated the giant golden sword with all his strength, and tit for tat with General Du he shouted in a deep voice, You're delusional. Then go to hell. General Du roared angrily. The giant phantom of the Kuei Ox immediately released the ball of electric light, with a radius of thousands of feet, and fiercely bombarded Ji Tianxing. Boom! In an instant, the giant ball of electric light bombarded Ji Tianxing's primordial spirit golden sword, and his figure was drowned. However, a scene that stunned General Du appeared. The power of thunder that he was proud of did not hurt Ji Tianxing. Instead, it burst into electric arcs all over the sky, and was quickly swallowed by the golden sword. After the dazzling purple light dissipated, Ji Tianxing's figure appeared, and he was unscathed. He stared at General Du coldly, and said in a contemptuous tone, Showing off your slight skill in front of an expert. The next moment, he waved his hand and threw out the sword of Burial of Heaven, and shouted in a low voice, Divine Sword Fusion! Suddenly, the dark and cold sword of Burial of Heaven expanded to thousands of feet in an instant, and merged with his primordial spirit golden sword. Chapter 15:15. General Du knew very well that the power of the Burial of Heaven must be terrifying. Seeing the fusion of the Burial of Heaven and the primordial spirit golden sword, his face suddenly changed, and his eyes were filled with anxiety and worry. With his strength and means, of course, he could kill Ji Tianxing, but he couldn't help but worry that Ji Tianxing could use the power of the Burial of Heaven to be in a stalemate with him for a long time. The huge commotion of the two sides fighting must have alarmed the guards on Mount God Bestowment. If he couldn't kill Ji Tianxing as soon as possible, the golden armored guards would soon arrive. By then his plan would be in vain. At this moment, Ji Tianxing had already controlled the giant sword to slash down. Heaven-splitting sword. The giant golden sword, suffused with a hazy black shadow and purple electric light, erupted with a destructive power and instantly struck General Du. He had no chance to dodge at all, and could only activate the Kuei Ox Phantom to block the giant sword. Boom! A loud noise that shook the sky exploded in the valley and spread for hundreds of miles. The giant Kuei Ox Phantom was cut in half on the spot, and the purple light burst out, illuminating the entire valley. General Du also looked as if he had been struck by lightning. His face turned pale, and blood spurted from his mouth and nose. His whole body was like a broken sack, flying more than 10 miles away, and smashing into the rock wall of Mount God Bestowment. The extremely hard dark brown rock wall was smashed into a pit with a radius of 10,000 feet, and dense cracks appeared around it. The sacred and majestic Mount God Bestowment also trembled a few times, making a dull rumbling sound. This sword was the most powerful sword that Ji Tianxing could unleash. Moreover, the fusion of the Burial of Heaven and the primordial spirit golden sword doubled the power of this sword. Because of this, General Du, who was at the first stage of the Tribulation Transcendence realm, was sent flying and seriously injured by this sword. The Kuei Ox Phantom that was cut in half quickly disappeared and retracted into General Du's body. His primordial spirit was seriously injured and was lying in the deep pit in the rock wall, buried by countless gravel. Ji Tianxing cast a spell again and controlled the primordial spirit golden sword to slash at the deep pit, wanting to take the opportunity to kill General Du. But at this moment, Deputy General Li rushed out from the side with his injuries. "Little bastard, you're courting death." His eyes were about to burst with anger, and he roared with murderous intent. He flew out of the deep pit to help General Du to block the sword. In the sky behind him, a 10,000-meter-tall golden shadow appeared. It was a golden-armored giant with 4 arms, each holding a saber, a spear, a sword, and a halberd. Under the control of Deputy General Li's body, the golden primordial spirit golden sword. Boom! With a thunderous explosion, the golden sword struck the golden-armored giant. Immediately, the 4 arms of the golden-armored giant were chopped off, turning into specks of golden light that dissipated into the sky. The golden sword golden giant was also cut in half, and quickly retracted into Deputy General Li's body. Deputy General Li's primordial spirit was seriously injured. He spat out blood and flew back into the deep pit. His robe was ragged, and his body was full of cracks. Blood gushed out and dyed him red. He struggled in the pile of gravel, and was about to get up to rescue General Du. At this moment, Ji Tianxing controlled the primordial spirit golden sword to slash down. Heaven-breaking sword. The giant sword released a golden light that covered the sky and the sun. It had the power to destroy everything, and hit Deputy General Li hard. Bang! Deputy General Li was cut into pieces by the giant sword on the spot, and a large rain of blood splattered out. The huge deep pit was also broken, and gravel splashed out everywhere. The violent and unparalleled power shook the entire God-sealing mountain violently, and made a deafening muffled sound. Deputy General Li's body was destroyed, and only a severely injured primordial spirit was left. He didn't dare to stay any longer. Panicking, he burrowed into the ground and fled without a trace. General Du's primordial spirit was also seriously injured, but his body was not destroyed, and his injuries were slightly lighter. He was also shocked by the terrifying power of the Burial of Heaven sword. His heart was filled with grief and anger, and he roared in a hoarse voice, "It really is the Burial of Heaven sword. No wonder it has such a terrifying power. Ji Tianxing, you're lucky this time. You won't be so lucky next time." He let out an unwilling roar, and hurriedly used the Earth Escape secret technique to drill into the rock wall and escape as fast as he could. Ji Tianxing's divine sense could detect the traces of General Du and Deputy General Li. He knew that they were escaping underground, but he didn't chase after them. With his strength and means, it was not enough to kill General Du and Deputy General Li. He could seriously injure them because of the power of the Burial of Heaven sword. If he rashly chased after them, he would have to leave the range of God-sealing mountain. At that time, he would encounter greater danger. At the same time, in a valley 15 kilometers away, Two black-robed experts witnessed the scene with their own eyes. They were so shocked that their hearts were beating wildly, and their eyes were filled with horror. It's unbelievable. Isn't Ji Tianxing only at the 5th firmament essence soul realm? How can he seriously injure those two fellows? They are experts at the 9th firmament essence soul realm and 1st firmament tribulation transcendence realm. Their primordial spirits were seriously injured. If he hadn't seen it with his own eyes, Manager Sun wouldn't have believed it even if he was beaten to death. This completely subverted his knowledge of the martial Tao. Division Master Wang was also shocked, and his eyes shone brightly. However, he was already mentally prepared and could still maintain his calm. He said in a deep voice, "Don't be too surprised. The one who seriously injured them wasn't Ji Tianxing, but the Burial of Heaven sword. After all, that's Kenshin's sword. It's only natural that it could kill them instantly, much less injure them." Manager Sun was filled with fear as he hurriedly asked, "Division Master Wang, are we still going to snatch the sword? The Burial of Heaven sword is so powerful, and we are only at the 1st firmament tribulation transcendence realm. I'm afraid we won't be able to withstand the terrifying might of the Burial of Heaven sword." Division Master Wang frowned and pondered for a moment before saying in a deep voice, "Of course we have to. Now is the best time to snatch the sword. That Burial of Heaven sword is incomplete, so its power is definitely limited. Ji Tianxing must have exhausted all his dermic powers in order to repel those two fellows. Now is the time when he is at his weakest. However, the guards of Mount God's ceiling will be arriving soon. We have to snatch the Burial of Heaven sword within 30 seconds. As he spoke, Division Master Wang silently left the rubble and flew towards Ji Tianxing. Manager Sun hesitated for a moment before hurriedly following. At this moment, Ji Tianxing had just retrieved the golden sword and the Burial of Heaven sword, and was about to fly into the sky and return to the peak of Mount God's ceiling. The white robe he was wearing had not only become rags, but it was also stained with dust and blood. His long hair was disheveled, and his figure looked quite miserable and weak. In just 2 breaths, Division Master Wang and Manager Sun had crossed more than 30 miles and rushed behind him. Without any hesitation, the two instantly took out their weapons and magic treasures and launched an attack on Ji Tianxing. Division Master Wang held a treasured saber and slashed at Ji Tianxing's back with all his strength. Chapter 15-16. Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun had both reached the 1st tier of the Tribulation Transcendence realm. Ji Tianxing was caught off guard by the sudden attack of the two. Division Leader Wang waved his saber and slashed out dozens of flaming blades, which shrouded Ji Tianxing's figure, preventing him from dodging. Deacon Sun's bronze crossbow was a supreme great essence soul realm dharma treasure. It was extremely powerful. The icy blue arrow shot out from the bronze crossbow was only 3 feet long. It was crystal clear and contained an extremely cold aura. The power of this arrow was extraordinary. It was enough to penetrate the dharma body of a 9th level essence soul realm expert and destroy his essence soul dharma idol. The most important thing was that the tiny arrows were not conspicuous in the sky full of flames. They were very well hidden. Ji Tianxing was about to use his sword to block the slash of the saber radiance when the icy blue arrow shot in front of him and was about to pierce his heart. At this critical moment, he suddenly felt a cold aura invading his body. It was as if his entire body was about to freeze. He reacted almost instinctively and immediately spread his golden wings to protect himself. Clang! The golden rock's wings had just closed when the icy blue arrow pierced the golden wings. There was a crisp sound of metal clashing. The icy blue arrow instantly shattered into hundreds of ice shards. The golden rock's wings also trembled violently and flashed with a dark golden light. Immediately after, more than a dozen powerful flaming blades struck the pair of golden wings. There was another dull sound. Ji Tianxing was sent flying and smashed into the ruins not far away. The golden wings trembled violently, and the golden light dimmed a little. It was obvious that their power had weakened a lot. Upon seeing this, Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun frowned their eyebrows, as their eyes flickered with excitement. The two of them had been hiding under Mount God's ceiling for more than 20 days. They had patiently watched the battle and waited until the last moment to attack. Originally, they were confident that they would be able to kill Ji Tianxing with a single strike. However, they did not expect that Ji Tianxing, who was already at the end of his rope, still had a trump card that could block their fatal attack. Swoosh! With a flash of golden light, Ji Tianxing unfolded his golden rock wings and revealed his body. He flew out from the rubble ruins and stared at Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun with a sharp gaze. His entire body emitted a killing intent that soared to the heavens. With a cold voice he shouted, "You two also want to steal the sword?" Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun were startled for a moment. Their eyes under the bronze masks revealed sinister sneers. "That's right. Since you know, why don't you hand over the sword of burial of heaven?" Ji Tianxing furrowed his brows. Many questions popped up in his mind, and anger surged in his heart. Of course, he knew that these two masked men in black were not in cahoots with the previous two. However, he could not understand how these people knew that he had the sword of burial of heaven. Why would these two groups of people take such a huge risk to kill people at the foot of Mount God Bestowment and steal the sword? Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun didn't give him any time to think. They immediately brandished their treasured sabers and released their bronze crossbows to attack him. "Sky Saber Splitter!" Division Leader Wang shouted angrily. He held the black treasured saber with both hands and slashed out 81 times in an instant. Each saber light was hundreds of feet long. They flickered with golden light and were extremely sharp and domineering. The 81 saber lights formed a crisscrossing saber net that descended from the sky toward Ji Tianxing. The saber net sealed the area within a radius of 10 miles, leaving him with no way to escape. Deacon Sun also activated the bronze crossbow with all his strength. He released 3 dark golden arrows that shot toward Ji Tianxing's forehead, throat and heart. Ji Tianxing was in a perilous situation. If he couldn't block the saber lights and arrows, his life would be in danger. At this critical moment, he didn't hesitate to use the primordial spirit golden sword and took out the sword of burial of heaven. "Burial of heaven, lend me a hand." He used his divine thought to send a message to the sword soul of burial of heaven. In the next moment, the sword of burial of heaven expanded to 1,000 feet tall and merged with the primordial spirit golden sword again. Then his body emitted a golden light that shot into the sky. His body turned into a dazzling brilliance and merged with the primordial spirit golden sword. The primordial spirit golden sword was formed by the fusion of the primordial spirit, the sword of burial of heaven, and Ji Tianxing. Its power had reached its peak. White Tiger Sacred Sword. Following a roar that sounded like a tiger's roar, 1,000 feet long golden sword released a huge white tiger shadow that slashed toward Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sunday. This was one of Kenshin's sword arts, the 4 spiritual sacred sword. Back then, Ji Tianxing was only at the Yuan Dan realm, and he could use this sword technique. However, this secret skill was a sacred sword art that Kenshin had created himself. Only a martial sage would be able to unleash the full power of the sword skill. Now Ji Tianxing was stronger and had a deeper understanding of the sword arts. The power of the White Tiger Sacred Sword was even more terrifying. Kaboom! The huge net formed by the 81 rays of saber radiance was instantly shattered by the White Tiger Sacred Sword and scattered in all directions. The 3 arrows that were shot toward them were also shattered on the spot by the White Tiger Sacred Sword. Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun's attacks were actually so weak under the White Tiger Sacred Sword. The two of them looked on helplessly as the huge sword slashed down on them. However, they were suppressed by the terrifying power and had no time to dodge or escape. Their eyes were filled with shock and fear. They were shocked that Ji Tianxing could use such a marvelous sword technique, and were fearful of the terrifying power of the sword of burial of heaven. Bang! With a loud muffled sound, Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun were sent flying by the huge golden sword. They crashed into the ground with a loud bang. A huge ravine that was 30 miles long and 10,000 feet wide was formed on the rocky ground. Endless crushed stones flew into the sky, and the earth within a radius of a few hundred miles trembled. The majestic Mount God bestowment shook again. At the bottom of the huge ravine, Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun were lying in the ruins covered with blood. Their bodies were covered by the earth and rocks. Fortunately, the two of them had the strength of the Tribulation Realm, so they were lucky enough to escape and block the White Tiger Sacred Sword's attack. However, their corporeal bodies were filled with cracks like broken porcelain bowls. Dark golden blood soaked their robes and mixed with the earth. They looked very miserable. Their primordial spirits were also injured by the White Tiger Sacred Sword. Their consciousness was somewhat blurry and drowsy. At this moment, Deacon Sun recalled what Division Leader Wang had said before. After all, that is Kenshin's sword. Not to mention injuring them. Even if it killed them instantly, it would be reasonable. He had personally experienced the terrifying power of the Sword of Burial of Heaven, and his heart was filled with regret. Damn it! We already knew the terrifying power of the Sword of Burial of Heaven, and saw the two of them being seriously injured with our own eyes. Why did we also end up like this and repeat the same mistake? At this moment, Ji Tianxing used the secret technique again, and his body fused with the huge sword once more. He wanted to use the Vermilion Bird Sacred Sword to deal with Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sunday. The two of them suddenly woke up and were filled with anger and worry. Chapter 15-17. Although Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun were both at the first level of the Tribulation Transcendence realm, they did not know each other. They did not know Ji Tianxing at all, let alone Ji Tianxing's true strength and trump cards. Division Leader Wang's wrong judgment led to them being injured by the White Tiger Sacred Sword. Not only did Ji Tianxing not fall into a weakened state, but he also used an even more powerful ultimate move. If they continued to fight, they would not be able to gain the upper hand at all, and they would not be able to obtain the Sword of Burial of Heaven. When the golden armored guards of Mount God Ceiling arrived, not only would their plan fail, but they would also be captured. At that time, their identities would be exposed. Swoosh, swoosh. The two of them flew into the sky with all their might, turning into two streams of light, and quickly disappearing into the horizon. With Ji Tianxing's strength, he could not catch up to them at all. He could only watch as they escaped. Swoosh. The golden light faded, and his figure appeared, standing in the sky. The Sword of Burial of Heaven and the Essence Soul Golden Sword quickly separated, shrinking thousands of times, and returned to his body. He looked up at the sky, and saw a few golden lights flashing through the clouds. A team of golden armored guards was rushing over as fast as lightning. He frowned and thought for a moment, then used the divine concealment step to stay invisible. He went around the golden armored guards, and returned to the peak of Mount God Ceiling from the side. 100 breaths have passed since I was attacked, and the golden armored guards have only just arrived. They are really slow. Don't tell me they don't care about anything outside of Mount God Ceiling? Ji Tianxing hid in the clouds and looked down at the golden armored guards, thinking silently. The golden armored guards rushed to the square at the foot of the mountain, and began to search and investigate. However, the valley and flat land within 100 miles had become ruins full of holes and cracks. Even the walls of Mount God Bestowment were left with two huge craters and spiderweb-like cracks. Other than that, there were no other clues. The golden armored guards searched the ruins for a long time, but they did not find any clues and could only return empty-handed. Seeing this, Ji Tianxing quietly returned to the peak of Mount God Ceiling and entered the clear sky pagoda. Soon, he returned to the Divine Book Pavilion. As usual, the second guardian was sitting in the corner of the hall, curled up in an armchair in the dark. Ji Tianxing walked in front of her and calmly reported, "Second Protector, I have brought back the books from the White Knight Empire." The second guardian was curled up in his loose black robe. When he heard Ji Tianxing's voice, he opened his turbid green eyes and glanced at him. "Put those books on the bookshelves according to their categories," she ordered slowly, then closed her eyes and continued to nap. Ji Tianxing's white robe was tattered, his hair was messy, and his body was stained with dust and blood. However, she acted as if she did not see it. She did not react at all, nor did she open her mouth to ask. Ji Tianxing glanced at her expressionlessly, and turned to walk to the bookshelf not far away. He took out the black ring, took out a few thousand books from it, and arranged them on the corresponding bookshelves according to different categories. An hour later, he put all the books on the shelves and returned to the secret room. The previous battle consumed most of his magic power, and he also suffered some minor injuries. Fortunately, with the help of the Burial of Heaven, he was able to beat back the 2 waves of attackers. After he treated his injuries, he sat on the futon and closed his eyes to rest, silently pondering. Whether it is the Great Guardian or the Second Guardian, they are both unreasonable people. This Clear Sky Pagoda is not like the Sky-bearing sect and the Monarch Mansion that I used to stay in. The rules here are strict, and there is no human touch to speak of. The Great Guardian is cold and strict. The Second Guardian saw that I was injured but did not care. The golden armored guards also came late. Humph. The so-called Holy Land of Martial Arts may have some divinity, but there is not much humanity, Ji Tianxing secretly thought in his heart, and the corner of his mouth hooked up into a disdainful sneer. He decided to hide the fact that he was attacked at the foot of the mountain and would never report it to the people of the Clear Sky Pagoda. After all, he had offended the Great Guardian, and even if the Great Guardian knew that he had been attacked, he would most likely turn a blind eye. Most importantly, if he reported this matter to the 2 guardians and the divine envoys, it would implicate the Sword of the Burial of Heaven. 2 groups of people who have nothing to do with me actually ran to the foot of Mount Godseal and took a huge risk to snatch the Sword of the Burial of Heaven. How did they know that the Sword of the Burial of Heaven was in my hands? And why did they try so hard to snatch it? Ever since he had come to Shinwu continent, he had only shown his face in the Outcloud Empire and had never gone to the Day-Night Empire. Now 2 envoys from the Day-Night Empire had actually attacked him and tried to snatch the Sword of the Burial of Heaven. He could not help but wonder if the Sword of the Burial of Heaven was hiding some shocking secret that had caused these people to be so crazy about it. Previously, he had read hundreds of thousands of books and had a sufficient understanding of Kenshin's life experiences and legends. He knew that Kenshin was the #1 powerhouse on Shinwu continent, and he was worshipped by millions of warriors. The Sword of the Burial of Heaven that Kenshin was wearing was naturally a divine sword that was known throughout the continent. Although the Burial of Heaven is a divine sword that everyone knows, 1,000 years have passed, and the Burial of Heaven in my hands is damaged and incomplete. Who would be able to recognize that it is the Sword of the Burial of Heaven? When he thought of this question, his first reaction was that it was someone from the Outcloud Empire. After I came to Shinwu continent, I only traveled around the Outcloud Empire. The news of the Burial of Heaven must have been leaked at that time. At that time, Emperor Outcloud personally came to find me and saw my Sword of the Burial of Heaven. Could it be that he recognized the Sword of the Burial of Heaven and spread the news? If not, how could the people of the Day-Night Empire know that I have the Sword of the Burial of Heaven? But why didn't Emperor Outcloud directly seize the Sword of the Burial of Heaven after recognizing it? Instead, why did he spread the news and let the powerhouses of other countries come to Mount Godseal to seize the sword? Ji Tianxing analyzed the situation for a while and determined that it was Emperor Outcloud who had recognized the Sword of the Burial of Heaven and spread the news. However, he could not understand why Emperor Outcloud had done this. Was he trying to get someone else to do his dirty work? Emperor Outcloud was a martial saint powerhouse, so there was no need for the emperor of a country to do such a thing. Ji Tianxing pondered for a long time, but he still could not figure out this problem. However, he was certain that a huge conspiracy was coming his way. After a while he thought of another more important problem. Since Emperor Outcloud could recognize the Sword of the Burial of Heaven, then the first, second, and divine envoys of the Clear Sky Pagoda might also recognize it. Fortunately, I haven't used the Sword of the Burial of Heaven in front of everyone since I came to the Clear Sky Pagoda. If the Sword of the Burial of Heaven was exposed, who knows how much trouble and disturbance it would cause. It looks like I have to be extra careful in the future and hide the Sword of the Burial of Heaven. Unless it's absolutely necessary, I can't use it. After making up his mind, he stretched out his right hand and brought out the sword of the burial of heaven. Just as he was about to put the sword of the burial of heaven into his spatial ring, a clear voice rang out in his mind. Chapter 15:18. Hearing this voice, Ji Tianxing was startled. Soon after, he smiled and sent a voice transmission. Qianyu, you've already finished your seclusion? The voice transmission came from Qianyu. Ever since he left the profound sky continent, Qianyu and the little black dragon had been cultivating in seclusion in the sword world. Qianyu's clear voice rang out in his mind once more. 20 days ago, I finished my seclusion, and my strength has increased by a great deal. Old Ji, coming quickly, I've made a great discovery. A great discovery? Ji Tianxing raised an eyebrow, his interest piqued. He opened the entrance to the sword world, and his figure flashed into the sword world, appearing in the sky above peaceful Earth City. Qianyu was flying in the blue sky, his body over 300 meters long, and his 12 furry tails flickering with an icy blue light. After not seeing him for a long time, Ji Tianxing sized him up, and found that his strength had reached the 5th layer of the spirit refining realm. When Qianyu saw him, she hurriedly flew over, her clear eyes filled with excitement. Old Ji, come with me, I'll take you to a place. As he spoke, he carried Ji Tianxing on his back and flew towards the northeast of peaceful Earth City. Ji Tianxing was a little confused and asked, Qianyu, where are you taking me? What did you discover? Qianyu flew through the sky as fast as lightning and said, Old Ji, the sword world is growing every day, constantly expanding its space. You should know this, right? Of course. Ji Tianxing nodded and explained, as the burial of heaven's strength continues to recover, the sword world will also expand. When the burial of heaven recovers to its peak, the sword world will also return to its original state, becoming a great world. Qianyu nodded to express his understanding and explained, 20 days ago, when I finished my seclusion, I went around the sword world to see how much it had expanded. As a result, I discovered a mysterious forbidden area at the northern border. Mysterious forbidden area? Ji Tianxing frowned and asked doubtfully, what is the forbidden area? Qianyu said excitedly, that forbidden area is in the mountains, sealed by a powerful formation. It looks majestic and magnificent. Unfortunately, with my strength, I can't get close at all, nor can I see the situation inside the forbidden area. Hearing what it said, Ji Tianxing became more confused and expectant. He said seriously, take me to see it. Qianyu sped up, crossing one majestic mountain range after another, rushing towards the end of the horizon. About 2 hours later, Qianyu finally reached the end of the sword world. Boundless darkness appeared in the sky, and on the ground in front of him, it was like an icy void. In the mountains next to the dark zone, there was a huge valley with a circumference of over 200 miles. The valley was surrounded by towering mountain ranges, and it looked like a coiled dragon. In the flat valley, there was a huge light shield with a circumference of 100 miles. It emitted a 7-colored divine light and an incomparably powerful aura. Ji Tianxing and Qianyu came to the top of the valley. They stopped 1,000 feet in the air and looked down at the entire valley. The 7-colored light shield with a circumference of 100 miles was shining with a dazzling brilliance. The light shield was very thick and was not transparent. The situation inside was faintly discernible, making it difficult to see clearly. Invisible shockwaves were emitted from the 7-colored light shield and spread in all directions. Ji Tianxing observed for a moment and saw that this was an incomparably powerful divine-level formation. Perhaps only martial gods could activate it. The invisible shockwaves were just the natural fluctuations of divine power when the divine-level formation was in operation. But to Qianyu, this power of the shockwaves was terrifying enough. It stopped 1,000 feet in the air, desperately resisting the shockwaves, but it seemed to be very difficult. Every time the shockwaves swept past, its huge body would tremble and burst out with an icy blue brilliance. It would consume a large amount of magic power to stay here for even a breath of time. Ji Tianxing saw that it was very uncomfortable and asked it to retreat far away. Then, he descended from the sky near the 7-colored light shield and observed it closely. Strangely, the powerful shockwaves from the divine level formation automatically swept past him and did not cause any impact or pressure on him. He observed carefully around the seven-colored light shield and was not affected in the slightest. After a quarter of an hour, he circled around the divine level formation and finally saw the situation inside the light shield. The ground within a radius of 100 miles was paved with huge black stones, making it look like an enormous altar. At the top of the altar, there was a huge black stone tablet that was 1,000 meters tall. There seemed to be words carved on the black stone tablet, but he could not see them clearly. He could only sense that the black stone tablet seemed to be similar to the sky sword steel and the 18 tombstones in the Kenshin tomb. An ancient divine tier formation protecting a huge altar and a mysterious stone tablet? Why would these things appear in the sword world? What secrets are hidden in the altar and the stone tablet? With doubts in his heart, Ji Tianqing used his divine sense to send a message to Burial of Heaven. Buried Heaven, I've discovered a god-level formation in the sword world. There's a black altar and a gigantic stone tablet in it. Do you know what this grand formation altar and steel are? Burial of Heaven seemed to ponder for a while before replying in a solemn tone. Look carefully at the altar and stone tablet. What do you think they look like? Ji Tianqing stared at the huge altar and stone tablet in the light shield. After a few careful glances, he suddenly frowned. Why do this altar and stone tablet look like a tomb? That's right, Burial of Heaven said in a low voice. That is a tomb, a Kenshin tomb. Ji Tianqing's brows immediately knit together. With a strange expression, he asked, Burial of Heaven, that can't be right, right? Isn't the real Kenshin tomb inside my body? Burial of Heaven said in a solemn and respectful voice. There is something I didn't tell you. There are actually two real Kenshin tombs, the Yin and Yang tombs. Before Kenshin fell, he used up all of his divine power to construct them. They contain heaven-shaking mysteries and peerless treasures. The Kenshin tomb inside your body is the Yin tomb. It contains Kenshin's sword arts and legacies. The Kenshin tomb in front of you is the Yang tomb. It contains Kenshin's relics and other things. The Yin and Yang tombs? So that's how it is. Ji Tianqing immediately understood. He stared at the Yang tomb with shining eyes and thought to himself, the Yin tomb inside my body not only has 18 tombstones, but also records Kenshin's supreme sword arts. There is another world inside the tombstones that connects the Heavenly Tome Pavilion and the Divine Weapon Pavilion. The importance of this Yang tomb shouldn't be any less than the Yin tomb. I wonder what treasures are stored inside. Chapter 1519. Ji Tianqing stared at the Yang tomb within the rainbow barrier, his heart filled with anticipation. Burial of Heaven, how can I enter the Yang tomb? Burial of Heaven said calmly. The formation protecting the Yang tomb is a great divine formation. Kenshin personally set it up and incorporated his formation Dao techniques. You can find the method to open it in the Heavenly Sutra Pavilion. Once you reach the martial god realm, you should be able to do so. What? I need to reach the martial god realm to open it? Ji Tianqing immediately frowned. It'll be at least a few decades before I reach the martial god realm. Burial of Heaven. Is there any way to open the divine formation ahead of time? Burial of Heaven said indifferently. Yes, I can help you open the divine formation. After a pause it added, but not now. My body hasn't recovered, and my strength hasn't recovered. So there's no way I can open the divine formation. Unless you can help me repair the sword and restore my strength to around 70%. Ji Tianqing thought for a moment and nodded. In comparison, repairing Burial of Heaven's sword should be easier than reaching the martial god realm. I can consider this method, but where can I find the materials to repair the divine sword? Burial of Heaven said solemnly. I'll naturally tell you what materials are needed in the future. Everything about Kenshin is buried in the Yin Yang tombs. If you can combine the tombs one day, you'll be able to discover the earth-shattering treasures that Kenshin left behind. Ji Tianqing's eyes flashed with a shrewd light. He hurriedly asked, what earth-shattering treasures? Burial of Heaven said with some disdain. It's a top secret that can shock the world and shake the 9 heavens. Then what is it? Ji Tianqing's interest was piqued, and he grew increasingly curious. Burial of Heaven said gravely, "With your current strength and situation, it's best if you don't know. You'll naturally understand once you open the divine formation and enter the Yang tomb." This answer from the Burial of Heaven made Ji Tianqing feel rather helpless. He could only suppress his curiosity and anticipation as he turned around and left the valley. Qianyu was waiting outside the valley. When he saw Ji Yinshu come back, he quickly greeted him and asked, "Old Ji, how was it? Did you find any clues?" "We'll talk about it when we get back." Ji Tianqing flew onto its back and ordered it to return to the peaceful soil city. An hour later, he brought Qianyu back to the peaceful soil city and used a secret sound transmission technique to summon the Golden Mountain King. After a short conversation, Ji Tianqing realized that the Jinshan King did not know about the seven-colored array. Therefore, he warned the Jinshan King. The Great Formation in the valley is a powerful divine grade formation. It is extraordinarily powerful. Don't let anyone get close to it to avoid being accidentally injured. The Jinshan King cupped his hands, indicating that he would do as he was told. Ji Tianqing then turned to Qianyu and said, "Qianyu, you don't have to go there anymore. It's too dangerous." Qianyu naturally nodded in agreement. Soon after, Ji Tianqing left the peaceful soil city and flew to the mountains in the west to visit the Little Black Dragon. According to Qianyu, the Little Black Dragon found a miraculous pool in the depths of the mountains in the west. There seemed to be a spring in the pool that gushed out spiritual water, making the entire pool seem like a paradise. Ever since the Little Black Dragon discovered the pool, it had been coiled up in the pool, unwilling to leave. It had been cultivating in the pool the entire time. Ji Tianqing was curious and wanted to see it for himself. The sword world continued to expand, and many wondrous things appeared. This small world was no longer monotonous and became colorful. He was looking forward to the future. When the Burial of Heaven recovered its strength, the sword world would expand into a complete large world. At that time, there would be even more wondrous things, right? An hour later, he flew to the depths of the mountains in the west. When he was still a few hundred miles away, he saw a five-colored auspicious cloud in the sky in front of him. This auspicious cloud was over 100 miles in radius and was suspended between several towering mountains. It did not dissipate even when the wind blew. The five-colored auspicious cloud was formed from the dense spiritual energy of heaven and earth. It constantly condensed drops of five-colored spiritual liquid that sprinkled down like rain. Below the auspicious cloud was a lake that was several dozen miles in radius and was surrounded by towering mountains. Looking down from the sky, this lake was like a mirror. There were many clouds floating above the lake, creating a scene of rosy clouds. Upon closer inspection, one would discover that the lake water was faintly seven-colored and contained dense spiritual energy of heaven and earth. Ji Tianqing flew to the air above the lake. He looked around and saw some clues. 5 mountain ranges intersected here, forming a deep valley in the middle. After it was filled with water, it turned into a lake. There are 5 tall mountains around the lake, occupying the positions of the 5 elements and forming a natural 5 elements array. This is where the spiritual energy of the 5 elements gathers, and is a natural land of spirit veins. No wonder there is a spirit spring here. The Little Black Dragon is really lucky to be able to find this natural spirit vein and gather the spiritual energy of the 5 elements in a radius of several 100,000 miles to help it cultivate and become stronger. He muttered to himself, a gratified smile appearing on his face. The surrounding mountains were protected by the 5 peaks. The lake water was as calm as a mirror, and clouds slowly flowed in the air. There were also 5-colored auspicious clouds in the sky that constantly sprinkled spiritual rain. It was truly a peaceful land of treasures, like a paradise. Ji Tianqing observed for a while before calling out to the calm lake, "Little Black Dragon, come out and meet me." As his voice fell, the originally calm center of the lake gradually rippled, spreading out in all directions. In a few short breaths, the lake water in a radius of 10 miles seemed to be boiling as huge waves surged. Then, a huge black shadow emerged from the water and broke through the water surface with a splash, flying into the sky. Roar! A resounding and majestic dragon roar resounded, echoing between the mountains. A 10-mile-long black dragon with a cold and majestic aura appeared in the air above the lake. It was the little black dragon. Now, not only was its body 10 miles long and majestic to the extreme, the dragon's scales all over its body shone with a dazzling cold light. To ordinary people, this water surface with a radius of dozens of miles could be called a large lake. However, compared to the huge body of the black dragon, this water surface could only be called a pool. Whoosh! The black dragon flew across the sky like lightning and quickly arrived in front of Ji Tianxing. It nodded slightly and said in a low muffled voice, "Old Ji, how did you find this place?" Ji Tianxing stepped onto the dragon's back and sized it up as he said, "I heard from Qianyue that you found a treasured land, so I came to see for myself. I didn't expect your strength to have improved so much in just 2 months." Chapter 15:20. The little black dragon circled above the lake, inhaling and exhaling like a whale sucking in water. It had a leisurely look on its face, and its tone was full of joy. "Old Ji, I talked to Qianyu before, and my situation is the same as hers. I don't know why, but ever since we broke through to the spirit refining realm, it's as if we've awakened our bloodlines, gained intelligence and innate gifts. Our cultivation speed has increased by leaps and bounds. Before, we thought that it was the sacred phoenix heart's powerful effects that brought about such changes. But now, I feel that it's not just the sacred phoenix heart's effects. There might be other reasons as well." After listening to the little black dragon's words, Ji Tianxing smiled and explained, "You are not a flood dragon from the East Sea, but a true divine dragon. Qianyu has an extraordinary background as well, and she is a sky fox. Both of you are divine beasts, and your future achievements are limitless. You will definitely reach the deity realm. Only after reaching the spirit refining realm did you awaken your divine beast bloodlines and innate gifts. That is the beginning of your growth. Don't worry too much about this matter. Just focus on your cultivation. When you and Qianyu break through to the primordial spirit realm, we will be able to roam the Xinwu continent unhindered and roam the world." The little black dragon nodded solemnly, and a look of anticipation appeared in its large eyes. "Old Ji, we know that it won't be long before you go and find Yun Yao. At that time, you will definitely encounter many dangers and obstacles, so we have been cultivating diligently. We hope that we can help you in the future." Hearing its serious and sincere words, Ji Tianxing's heart warmed slightly, and he nodded. "All right, I also look forward to the two of you becoming stronger as soon as possible and roaming the world with me." He chatted with the little black dragon for a while longer before leaving the 5 elemental spirit lakes. Not long after, he exited the sword world and returned to his private room to continue cultivating. It was late at night, and not a sound could be heard. A bright moon hung high in the sky, sprinkling down bright moonlight. At the peak of Godseal Mountain, the 6 palaces that housed the geniuses of the 6 nations were still lit. Within the day-night palace, in a dark room, there were specks of dazzling multicolored light. A young man in a black robe was sitting on a futon made of spiritual jade. This person's figure was tall and straight, and his face was like jade. He wore the attire of an elegant young master, and his bearing was rather noble and refined. He was the number 1 genius of the White Knight Empire, the 7th son of the White Knight Holy Emperor, Song Zhanyu. At this moment, he was holding a white communication jade slip with both hands, which was flashing with white light. The jade slip recorded a secret order from the White Knight Holy Emperor. After he finished reading the order with his divine sense, he frowned and began to ponder. After a long time, he put the jade slip into his interspatial ring and murmured with a complicated expression, "Ji Tianxing, the sword of burial of heaven. Who would have thought that the world's number 1 divine sword would be in his hands?" This person was the number 1 genius of the Chu Yin Empire. The great emperor of the Chu Yin Empire actually did not discover that he possessed the sword of burial of heaven and allowed him to come to the Clear Sky Pagoda. Was this the will of the heavens? It was destined that the Sword of Burial of Heaven would not belong to the Chuyin Empire. After Ji Tianqing came to the Clear Sky Pagoda, he did not use any weapons or magic treasures. It seemed that he intentionally hid the existence of the Sword of Burial of Heaven. If not for the order from my father, I would not have known this secret. The light in his eyes became sharper and sharper. He secretly clenched his fists and murmured to himself, "However, since I know this secret, I must find an opportunity to snatch the Sword of Burial of Heaven. If I can snatch the Sword of Burial of Heaven for my father, I may be able to help my father advance to the martial god realm. At that time, my father will be able to stand shoulder to shoulder with martial god Taihao, and I will become the new holy emperor." Speaking of this, the corners of his mouth curled up into a faint sneer, and his eyes surged with traces of anticipation. However, he calmly pondered for a moment, and the sneer on his lips gradually disappeared. It's a pity that Ji Tianqing seems to be highly regarded and protected by the little princess. He was punished to clean the Divine Book Pavilion for half a year. In this half a year, he will probably stay in the Divine Book Pavilion, and I will not have a chance to make a move. Could it be that I can only wait until half a year later, during the God-Disciple test, to make a move? That won't do. I have to think of a way as soon as possible and find a chance to make a move. Thinking of this, he frowned and pondered. Time passed very quickly. Unknowingly, another half a month had passed. In this half a month, Ji Tianqing had been in closed-door cultivation in the Divine Book Pavilion's secret chamber, and no one came to disturb him. After half a month of bitter cultivation, his strength steadily advanced towards the 6th level of the Essence Spirit Realm. It was a pity that he still could not fully comprehend the 6th move of the 9 Swords of Burial of Heaven. Early in the morning, he ended his closed-door cultivation and walked out of the secret chamber. He walked to the edge of the hall and prepared to find some ancient books to read from a row of bookshelves. At this moment, his gaze passed through the wide window and suddenly caught a glimpse of the square below the Clear Sky Pagoda. There was a mighty troop that was walking towards a certain palace. It was an honor guard of about 200 people. There were more than 100 guards dressed in silver armor, and more than 100 young and dignified maidservants. The guards had a dignified bearing while the maidservants' clothes fluttered in the wind. They carried all kinds of musical instruments and carried bamboo baskets filled with flowers. In the middle of the honor guard was a golden carriage inlaid with gold and jade. It had an imperial canopy and was surrounded by jeweled curtains. Ji Tianqing looked down at the honor guard from above. He could not see the person in the golden carriage, nor could he guess the identity of the person riding the carriage. But he thought to himself that a person who could put on such a grand display and enter God-Sealing Mountain's summit with such fanfare was likely to have an extraordinary background. Could it be Divine Lord Taihao's divine son or princess? Jiuzhou's elder brother or sister? Moments later, the honor guard entered a resplendent palace before he retracted his gaze. Just as he turned his head, he saw the black-robed second guardian standing not far from him. The second protector came without a sound like a ghost. The pair of turbid eyes under the black robe were also staring at the square below the Clear Sky Pagoda, watching the honor guard enter the palace. Ji Tianqing hesitated before asking, "Second guardian, that troop just now, whose honor guard is it?" Second guardian looked out of the window expressionlessly and said in a hoarse and calm voice, "It's the crown prince of the Thousand Snow Empire, Luli. He was once a disciple of the Clear Sky Pagoda. After he achieved great success, he left the Clear Sky Pagoda and returned to the Thousand Snow Empire to be conferred the title of Crown Prince. Every 3 years, he will return to the Clear Sky Pagoda to pay his respects to Divine Lord Taihao in the temple. But he will first stay in the Temple of Tranquility for 7 days. After 7 days of cleansing, he will go to the temple to pay his respects." "I see." Ji Tianqing nodded to show that he understood. Second guardian showed a gratified expression and continued, "Luli is very outstanding. He has come to the Divine Book Pavilion countless times, flipping through books without sleep or food. He has also consulted me many times about Taoist scriptures." Chapter 1521. In Ji Tianxing's eyes, the second guardian was a mysterious and unreasonable weird old woman. But when she talked about the crown prince of the Thousand Snow Empire, Lu Li, her tone and eyes were much gentler, revealing some kindness. Ji Tianxing immediately realized that in the second guardian's eyes, only a diligent and inquisitive young man like Lu Li, who focused on reading books, was a genius with both integrity and talent. And someone like him, who had been in the Divine Book Pavilion for more than a month, and only knew how to read history books and biographies, was a piece of rotten wood that could not be carved. Ji Tianxing was well aware of this point, but he did not bother to argue about it. That crown prince of the Thousand Snow Empire, Lu Li, had nothing to do with him, so he did not care. After a while, the second guardian slowly walked away. Ji Tianxing also returned to the secret chamber and continued to cultivate. Staying in the Divine Book Pavilion, the days were boring and dull. But he had long been used to it. Instead, he felt very comfortable and at ease, which was more convenient for him to cultivate and comprehend swordsmanship. However, the peaceful days were only 3 days old when they were interrupted. In the evening, Ji Tianxing was cultivating in the secret chamber. Suddenly, the second guardian's deep voice came from outside the door. Ji Tianxing, come out quickly. I have something to tell you. Ji Tianxing was interrupted. He could not help but frown. He got up slowly and walked out of the secret chamber. The second guardian was standing outside the door. Seeing him come out, the second guardian said expressionlessly, "For the next few days, you don't have to stay in the Divine Book Pavilion. Go to the Hall of Tranquility and wait for orders." Hearing this, Ji Tianxing was stunned. He frowned and asked, "Hall of Tranquility? Isn't that where the crown prince of the Thousand Snow Empire lives temporarily?" "Yes." The second guardian nodded and said indifferently, "After you go to the Hall of Tranquility, you must obey orders and serve the crown prince of the Thousand Snow Empire." "Let me serve Lu Li?" Ji Tianxing frowned. He stared at the second guardian and asked, "Second guardian, is this your arrangement?" Ever since Lu Li's procession of honor arrived at the Mountain of Investiture, he had been staying in the Clear Heaven Pagoda. Now, second guardian suddenly told him to serve Lu Li at the Hall of Tranquility. No matter how one looked at it, it seemed to be the second guardian's decision. After all, she valued Lu Li. However, Ji Tianxing was dissatisfied and secretly thought, not to mention the crown prince of the Thousand Snow Empire, even the holy emperor of the Thousand Snow Empire, is not qualified for me to serve. Are you treating me like a servant? The second protector glanced at him, as if he had seen through his thoughts. He explained in a cold tone, "I'm just informing you. This is not my intention. This is the decision of the Grand Guardian. I heard that Lu Li is interested in you after hearing about your story. That is why he begged the Grand Guardian to let you go to the Hall of Tranquility. It's the Great Guardian again." This thought flashed through Ji Tianxing's mind. He wondered to himself, "This Lu Li, I don't think he is just curious about me. He must have some other purpose." While Lu Li was thinking, the second guardian had turned around and left. He said in a dignified voice, "You are now a criminal. Don't even think about disobeying the orders of the Grand Guardian. Otherwise, you will be punished even more. Go to the Hall of Tranquility now. If you are smart enough and can make Lu Li happy, maybe he can put in a good word for you in front of the Grand Guardian." With that said, the second guardian disappeared into the darkness and left quietly. Ji Tianxing curled his lips and sneered to himself. He is just a crown prince of an empire. How arrogant he is. I'd like to see what medicine is hidden in this guy's gourd, and what he wants to do." Then, he left the Divine Book Pavilion and walked out of the Clear Heaven Pagoda. The sky was getting dark. Night was about to fall. The entire peak of the Mountain of Investiture was shrouded in darkness. Many of the palaces were lit with lights. It was very quiet. Only the Hall of Tranquility was not only brightly lit, but there were also more than 200 people living in the palace. The sound of people and music could be heard constantly. Ji Tianxing walked across the square unhurriedly and walked to the gate of the Hall of Tranquility. Besides several golden-armored imperial bodyguards guarding the gate of the palace, there was also a middle-aged man, wearing a blue robe and a crown on his head. This person's attire was like a steward of the palace. He also looked like a deacon, who was in charge of internal affairs. Seeing Ji Tianqing arrive, the blue-robed man waved at him and said with a kind expression, "May I ask if you are young Master Ji Tianqing?" Ji Tianqing saw that his attitude was somewhat respectful. He couldn't help but be puzzled. He raised his eyebrows and asked, "You are?" The blue-robed man smiled and cupped his hands in greeting, saying, "Greetings, young Master Ji. My surname is Feng. I am Crown Prince Qinshua's supervisor of internal affairs. I followed His Highness to the Mountain of Investiture to manage internal affairs for His Highness." Ji Tianqing nodded at him as a greeting. Supervisor Feng was quite astute. He could see that Ji Tianqing's personality was cold, and he didn't want to talk too much. He hurriedly extended his hand and made a gesture of invitation. "Young Master Ji, this is not the place to talk. Please follow me into the palace to see His Highness the Crown Prince." Ji Tianqing glanced at him and didn't say anything. He silently followed behind him and entered the Hall of Tranquility. Not long after, the two of them entered the magnificent guest hall. A handsome young man in an embroidered robe and a golden crown of dragon and phoenix sat on the large jade chair at the head of the table. This person was tall and handsome. His temperament was elegant, and he didn't lose his masculinity. He was really a handsome young master of a noble family. He was sitting on the chair and holding an ancient scroll. He was engrossed in reading. There was a thoughtful expression between his eyebrows. Two young and beautiful maids dressed in long, thin dresses were nestled by his feet, gently massaging his legs. Seeing this scene, Ji Tianqing guessed that this person must be the Crown Prince of the Thousand Snow Empire, Lu Li. Sure enough, Supervisor Feng walked in front of Lu Li and bowed. He reported, "Your Highness the Crown Prince, young Master Ji has been invited." Lu Li quickly raised his head and put down the ancient scroll in his hand. He looked at Ji Tianqing with a face full of joy. The two guards were very tactful. After bowing to him, they silently took their leave. Lu Li stood up and walked towards Ji Tianqing. With a smile on his face, he cupped his hands and said, "This must be young Master Ji Tianqing, right? I am Lu Li. I have been looking forward to meeting young Master Ji for a long time." Although Ji Tianqing saw that Lu Li was so polite, he guessed that this person must have other intentions. However, as the saying goes, one doesn't slap a smiling face. Since the other party was so polite, he nodded calmly and greeted him. "Crown Prince Lu is too polite." The two exchanged some pleasantries and sat down. Supervisor Feng brought a cup of spirit tea for Ji Tianqing and silently stood next to Lu Li. Ji Tianqing didn't beat around the bush with Lu Li. He asked directly, "Crown Prince Lu, I don't know you and we have nothing to do with each other." Chapter 1522. Hearing Ji Tianqing's words, Lu Li was stunned. He put on a self-mocking smile and hurried to explain. "Young Master Ji, you misunderstood. You are the #1 genius of the Chuyan Empire. How dare I let you serve me? I just heard about what happened a month ago. I am very curious about young Master Ji. That is why I asked the Chief Guardian to give an order to invite you to the Hall of Tranquility." Lu Li was the Crown Prince of the Empire of Thousand Snow. Even if he had a noble status, it was only for the people of the Empire of Thousand Snow. Ji Tianqing was the #1 genius of the Chuyan Empire. There was no need to be polite to him. Even if Lu Li had reached the Tribulation Realm, it was nothing. All the candidates who were qualified to enter the Tower of Haotian could reach the Tribulation Realm in the future. Therefore, Lu Li's words were reasonable. Ji Tianqing didn't ask any more questions. He nodded to show that he understood. He knew that Lu Li wouldn't come to him for no reason. Lu Li would tell him his intentions. He didn't need to say anything. He just needed to wait and see. As expected, Lu Li put away his smile and put on a solemn expression. He looked at Ji Tianqing with glowing eyes and said in a low voice, "Young Master Ji, about the matter of worshipping the immortal Lord, I have understood the cause and effect. I have thought about it for a long time, and I have checked many ancient books and documents. I can conclude that it must be a misunderstanding. Most likely, young Master Ji's talent in martial arts is outstanding. Under special circumstances, You caused such a great change in heaven and earth. It is a pity that this is related to the mysteries of heaven and the great Tao. Ordinary people can't understand it. Lu Li's words were obviously meant to please Ji Tianxing, but he expressed it in a subtle way. It wasn't disgusting, and it also showed his profound knowledge and steadiness. If it were an average genius with resentment in his heart, he would feel the same way after hearing Lu Li's words. He might even regard Lu Li as a confidant. However, the person Lu Li met was Ji Tianxing, a very special guy. He glanced at Lu Li and said with a faint smile, "So Prince Lu also thinks that the chief guardian is ignorant and doesn't understand the mysteries of heaven?" Lu Li's expression changed. He quickly waved his hand and said, "Young Master Ji, you misunderstood again. I didn't mean that." On God Bestowment Mountain, he actually dared to speak ill of the great protector. Wasn't that courting death? Ji Tianxing had no scruples. He stared at him playfully and asked, "What do you mean?" Lu Li also felt that Ji Tianxing was not easy to deal with. He frowned. He pondered for a moment before continuing. "What I mean is, young Master Ji, as the #1 genius of the Chuyan Empire with outstanding talent, you should have limitless glory. However, a misunderstanding caused his reputation to be tarnished, and he was even punished to clean the Divine Book Pavilion. It was truly a pity. The candidates of the God's disciple from different countries were called young geniuses, but they did not have the corresponding foresight and insight. They even gloated and laughed at Ji Hao behind his back. When this monarch found out about this matter, his heart was also quite unhappy. "I feel that young Master Ji is not worth it." His words could not only provoke Ji Tianxing's anger, but also let Ji Tianxing have a sense of approval. It could be said that he had won the hearts of the people. However, Ji Tianxing still looked calm and indifferent. He slowly drank his tea and said, "I am an eagle that soars to the 9 heavens. Why would I care about the criticism of a sparrow?" Lu Li's body trembled. A strange light flashed through his eyes. He sneered in his heart. What an arrogant kid. He really has no sense of shame. However, on the surface, he put on a look of admiration and said sympathetically, "Young Master Ji, you are wise. You are absolutely right. This is the state of mind of a peerless genius." Then, as an experienced person, he took the initiative to introduce the situation of God Bestowment Mountain to Ji Tianxing, as well as the God's disciple examination and cultivation. After all, he had cultivated at God Bestowment Mountain for more than 100 years. He only left God Bestowment Mountain to return to the Thousand Snow Empire after he reached the 3rd level of the Tribulation Realm. Ji Tianxing listened in silence. He learned many secrets from Lu Li and had a deeper understanding of God's disciples and the Haotian Pagoda. Unknowingly, 2 hours had passed. Most of the time, it was Lu Li who was talking and Ji Tianxing who was listening. However, on the surface, the conversation between the two seemed to be pleasant and harmonious. Lu Li saw that the time was right. He confided in Ji Tianxing and told him his true intentions. "Young Master Ji, I believe you also understand that God Bestowment Mountain is just a holy land for martial arts. It is a place for God's disciples to communicate and cultivate. Most of the God's disciples will leave God Bestowment Mountain in the future and find their own way out. Only a few of the top God's disciples may be favored by the God and promoted to the God's kingdom in the 9 heavens. They will be given a more honorable status. However, only 1 or 2 of these lucky ones will appear in hundreds of years. The chances are very slim. I am afraid that your current situation is not good. Not only will it be difficult for you to be valued, but you may also be ostracized and oppressed. Young Master Ji, with your talent in martial arts, you don't have to be bullied like this. You are not someone with your temperament and temperament." Hearing this, Ji Tianxing knew that Lu Li was going to get to the point. He looked at Lu Li calmly, raised his eyebrows and asked, "What do you mean?" Lu Li said solemnly, "Like my father, I value talents the most. I don't want pearls to be covered in dust. Therefore, every few years, I will come to God Bestowment Mountain to pay my respects. I want to help some unaccomplished talents and let them regain their glory. In the future, I will inherit the position of the Holy Emperor of Thousand Snow. I must have talents that I can trust and put in important positions. Young Master Ji, to be honest, I feel like you are an old friend at first sight. I admire you. With great sincerity, I invite you to join the Empire of Thousand Snow. As long as you agree, we will call each other brothers. I will definitely treat you as my most trusted brother. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows. He didn't say anything, but he was laughing in his heart. So this guy wants to rope me in. He has other plans. Seeing that Ji Tianxing didn't say anything, Luli thought that Ji Tianxing was hesitating. Luli continued, Young Master Ji, as long as you are willing to follow me, I will not treat you badly. I will give you the best treatment and cultivation resources. I will make you the most dazzling powerful warrior of the Empire of Thousand Snow. Oh, Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows and said in a playful tone. Speaking of which, I remember. The #1 genius of the Empire of Thousand Snow, Jiang Ningxue, is more talented and powerful than me. Prince Lu, why don't you try your best to cultivate her? Why are you wasting time on me? Speaking of Jiang Ningxue, Luli was stunned for a moment. Then he put on a playful smile. Oh, young Master Ji, you have noticed Jiang Ningxue for a long time? What do you think of Jiang Ningxue? Ji Tianxing said calmly. She's beautiful, gentle, and talented in martial arts. Of course, she's a 1 in a million beauty. Chapter 1523. Ji Tianxing didn't expect Luli to suddenly say this. An idea popped up in his mind. A honey trap? Looks like this guy is plotting something big. With this thought, he looked at Luli calmly and shook his head. Crown Prince Lu, Jiang Ningxue is a rare beauty, but love is a matter of mutual consent. Besides, I already have a wife. I only want to tie her down. I won't fall in love with anyone else. Luli seemed to have expected this answer. He waved his hand with a smile and said, Young Master Ji, you are wrong. Which man doesn't have 3 wives and 4 concubines? Even the wealthy families in the mortal world have groups of wives and concubines. A proud son of the heavens like you should have countless beauties to match your talent and reputation. As for Jiang Ningxue, you can rest assured. With me as the matchmaker, Jiang Ningxue won't dare to disobey. Besides, young Master Ji is so handsome and talented. Many girls have fallen in love with you. Maybe Jiang Ningxue has some feelings for you? Ji Tianxing just smiled and didn't say anything. Seeing this, Luli continued to persuade. Young Master Ji, even if you already have a wife, Jiang Ningxue can be your concubine. As long as you nod, I will immediately summon Jiang Ningxue to see you, and create an opportunity for you two. You two are a perfect match. You are both extraordinary geniuses. If you two can become Taoist companions, it will be a good story. Ji Tianxing waved his hand and said seriously, I appreciate Crown Prince Lu's kindness, but I have made up my mind. There is no need to mention this again. Seeing that he refused firmly, Luli didn't feel embarrassed. He nodded with a smile and said, In that case, let nature take its course. I think highly of you, so I am a bit impatient. Ji Tianxing stood up, cupped his hands and said, Crown Prince Lu, it is late. If there is nothing else, I will take my leave. Luli nodded and said, All right, let's stop here for tonight. Young Master Ji, go and rest. I have already asked Steward Fang to arrange a place for you to stay. For the next few days, young Master Ji will stay in this shrine of peace. 4 days later, I would like to invite young Master Ji to follow me to the Divine Hall, to pay respects to Divine Lord Taihao. Ji Tianxing was stunned. He frowned at him and asked, Crown Prince Lu, is this your decision? Or is it the Great Guardian's idea? Luli smiled and explained, Of course it is my idea. I know that the previous matter was a misunderstanding, which led to young Master Ji being punished. This monarch has thought about it for a long time before making this decision. I implore the Great Protector to give you another chance. For my sake, the Great Protector agreed to this matter, and allowed you to follow me to the temple to pay your respects again. As long as young Master Ji sincerely repents in the Divine Hall, the misunderstanding from before can be resolved, and the awkwardness between you and the Great Guardian can be alleviated. With that said, Luli put on a confident smile and stared at Ji Tianxing. He thought to himself, Ji Tianxing is now a criminal. Not only did he offend the great protector, but he is also mocked by the young geniuses of various countries. He is a proud and arrogant person. How can he endure such humiliation? He must have a belly full of resentment in his heart that cannot be resolved. I will plead with the great protector for him and give him a chance to turn over a new leaf. This will give him a way out. As long as he is not an idiot, he will seize this opportunity, and he will be grateful to me. Ji Tianxing raised his eyebrows. After a moment of consideration, he nodded and said, Since Crown Prince Lu has good intentions, I will accept deferentially. After all, the great protector has transferred me to the Shrine of Peace, and I cannot disobey. I can only stay here and follow Crown Prince Lu's arrangements. Lu Li was delighted to see that Ji Tianxing had agreed. He nodded and said, If so, then it is settled. Steward Fang, take young Master Ji to rest. You must instruct the servants to take good care of young Master Ji, and not neglect him. Steward Fang bowed and accepted the order. He took Ji Tianxing out of the living room and walked towards the depths of the palace. After Steward Fang left with Ji Tianxing, Lu Li was still standing in the living room, looking at the curtain of night outside the door. His eyes were filled with shrewdness, and a faint sneer hung on the corner of his mouth. He murmured to himself, This damn Ji Tianxing is really a cunning and difficult person to deal with. No wonder Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun failed in their mission and failed to get the Sword of the Burial of Heaven. They were even seriously injured by Ji Tianxing. This guy is not only powerful but also scheming. He is really not easy to deal with. However, I have come out personally and used the opportunity of paying respects to him. I have a good chance of winning, now that he has accepted my goodwill. The first step of my plan has been completed. In the next few days, I will strike while the iron is hot. I will definitely succeed in getting the Sword of the Burial of Heaven. Speaking of this, Lu Li put on a sneer and squinted his eyes. He walked out of the reception hall and entered the heavily guarded study. About 7 minutes later, Steward Fang came back and reported to Lu Li in the study. Your Highness, I have made proper arrangements for Ji Tianxing. He has settled down and is resting. Lu Li nodded with satisfaction. He ordered Steward Fang, summon Jiang Ningxue to the study. I have something important to tell her. Steward Fang said yes, and hurried out of the study to carry out the order. Lu Li sat in front of the spacious study table, sipping a cup of mystical tea. When he finished the cup of mystical tea, Steward Fang also brought Jiang Ningxue to the study. General Manager Fang tactfully retreated and closed the door. Only Lu Li and Jiang Ningxue were left in the study. Lu Li sat on the jade chair with a jade teacup in his hand. He turned around and looked at Jiang Ningxue. Jiang Ningxue was wearing a white dress. She stood in the study with elegance and dignity, looking straight into Lu Li's eyes. Her pair of eyes that were as clear as autumn water contained a faint trace of affection, as well as a bit of joy. Lu Li, didn't you tell me to cultivate in the Tower of Haotian and come to see me in 2 years? I have only been away for 2 months, and you have come to the Mount of Canonization? Needless to say, Jiang Ningxue and Lu Li had known each other for a long time, and their relationship was not simple. Lu Li nodded calmly. Pointing to the chair in front of him, he said in a low voice, Swear, it is a long story. Come and sit down. Jiang Ningxue said yes. She walked over to the study table and sat down with dignity. Lu Li looked at her solemnly. After a sigh he said, Swear, I will not hide it from you. I am here at the Mount of Canonization because of my father's order. Saint Emperor's order? Jiang Ningxue was surprised. Seeing his serious expression, she asked with concern, Lu Li, what is it? Why are you so worried? Chapter 1524. The Sword of Burial of Heaven? Jiang Ningxue's body trembled. Her eyes were filled with shock. Are you talking about Kenshin's sword, the legendary #1 sword in the world? Yes. Lu Li nodded solemnly. Jiang Ningxue's pretty face was filled with disbelief. More than 1,000 years ago, Kenshin defeated all the heroes in the world with the Sword of Burial of Heaven. He even suppressed the 3 martial gods. Everyone knows about this. Of course, I have heard of Kenshin and the number one sword. However, after Kenshin died, didn't the sword of burial of heaven disappear without a trace? Luli nodded and explained. 8,000 years ago, the sword of burial of heaven did disappear with Kenshin's death. However, the sword of burial of heaven has reappeared in the world today. A lucky guy got the sword and came to the Clear Heaven Pagoda. That lucky guy is the number one genius of the Outcloud Empire, Ji Tianxing. What? Jiang Ningxue was even more surprised. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. That cold and arrogant guy in a white robe? He offended the dignity of the Divine Master during the worship ceremony, causing great changes in heaven and earth. The Divine Master was furious. Before she could finish, Luli shook his head and said, "No one knows the exact reason for that matter. However, I think it has something to do with the sword of burial of heaven. If not, how could that guy cause such a great change in heaven and earth with his strength and talent? As for the Divine Master being furious and causing great changes in heaven and earth, and being struck by lightning, that's even more nonsense." Jiang Ningxue frowned and thought for a moment before she nodded and said, "I see. That's incredible. Luli, the Divine Emperor sent you to mount God's ceiling for the sword of burial of heaven?" "That's right." Luli nodded again and explained. Saint Emperor received the news more than a month ago. He sent Division Leader Wang and Deacon Son of the Martial League to hide at the foot of the Mount of Gods, waiting for an opportunity to assassinate Ji Tianxing and snatch the sword of the burial of heaven. Unfortunately, their operation failed, and they were seriously injured by Ji Tianxing. They fled back to the empire in a sorry state. Jiang Ningxue was shocked once again. Her eyes were filled with disbelief. How is this possible? Those two were crossing Calamity Realm experts. How could they be injured by Ji Tianxing? I've seen Ji Tianxing before. He's clearly only at the fifth firmament essence soul realm. Could it be that the might of the burial of heaven sword injured Division Leader Wang and Deacon Sun? Exactly. Luli nodded slightly and said solemnly, "The burial of heaven is the number one sword in the world. Its might is unparalleled. Anyone who can obtain it can find Kenshin's tomb and obtain Kenshin's supreme techniques and inheritance. Not only can they become an god of war expert, they can even break through the shackles of heaven and earth and ascend to the upper world. Therefore, the Divine Emperor gave a death order to obtain the sword of the burial of heaven at all costs. For this we can pay any price." Jiang Ningxue looked at him deeply and nodded. "Luli, I know you have great ambitions. I also believe that you will become an unparalleled expert. Since you have the Divine Emperor's order, I will do my best to help you achieve your wish." Luli was touched. He reached out to hold her white and tender hands, nodded and said, "Schwer, I know how you feel about me. If I can achieve my wish and successfully obtain the sword of the burial of heaven, I can help Father break through to the God of War realm and become the fourth God of War in the world. In the future, I will also become the new Divine Emperor. By then, I will not let you down." Jiang Ningxue's glamorous face blushed slightly. Her eyes flickered with a hint of gratitude. Her bashful and timid look was even more beautiful than before, and it was enough to make one's heart drunk. But soon, she calmed down and asked Luli, "So, what is your plan? How can I help you?" Luli returned to his normal state. He said seriously, "So far, there are also people from the Empire of White Knight who know the news. They sent out 2 envoys to assassinate Ji Tianxing under the pretext of presenting the books as a tribute. Even though their plan failed, I believe that people from the Empire of White Knight will not give up. They will think of other ways. Therefore, we must make it quick and get the sword of the burial of heaven as soon as possible in case of any undue delay. I have begged the Chief Guardian to transfer Ji Tianxing to the Hall of Tranquility. He is currently living in the hall. When the news spreads out, all the geniuses from different countries will understand that I am trying to win over Ji Tianxing, and Ji Tianxing will accept it. This will not only drive a wedge between Ji Tianxing and the Empire of Chu Yun, but also make it easier for me to carry out my plan." Jiang Ningxue nodded and said, "During the worship ceremony, I have secretly observed that the geniuses of the Empire of Chu Yun are not friendly to Ji Tianxing. Apart from a guy called Endless Void, who is friends with Ji Tianxing, the others seem to be hostile to him. Now that Ji Tianxing has come to the Hall of Tranquility, people from the Empire of Chu Yin will definitely work together to deal with him. Lu Li nodded with a smile and continued. Driving a wedge between him and the Empire of Chu Yin is only the first step of the plan. The second step is to get close to Ji Tianxing and find out where the Sword of the Burial of Heaven is hidden. Swear, I need your help on this matter. Ji Tianxing has a good impression of you. He seems to like you. I will arrange for you to stay with him, so that you can get closer to him. What? Jiang Ningxue was stunned. She stared at Lu Li with her eyes wide open in disbelief. Her pretty face turned pale. Her eyes were filled with shock and disappointment. She could not believe that the crown prince, who was graceful and gentle as jade in her mind, would say something like this. Lu Li, you know that my heart belongs only to you. You want to send me to another man in order to complete the mission of the Holy Emperor? You, how can you do this? Jiang Ningxue's heart was filled with shame and disappointment. Her body was trembling. She stared at Lu Li, as if she was trying to see through him. Lu Li did not feel embarrassed. He held her soft hands and explained in a gentle tone. Swear, of course. I don't have the heart to hurt you, let alone give you away. But I am doing this for the sake of the big picture. Moreover, I've already tested Ji Tianxing. Although he's a cunning and scheming person, I've already tested him. But he is not a wretched and obscene person. He is a decent gentleman. He will not be rude to you. Swear, for the sake of me and the future of the Empire of Thousand Snow, please bear with it for the time being. Lu Li looked at Jiang Ningxue with sincerity. His tone was sincere as well. Jiang Ningxue looked at him in silence. Her eyes kept changing. Many complicated thoughts flashed through her mind. After a long while, she put on a bitter sneer, nodded and said, You are the man I love. You are the son of the Holy Emperor. Fine, I'll agree to your request. You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support. And don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.